The first cool breath of ERG Chebbi reaches you at the edge of the Dune Sea, where sand drift has gathered the Sahara into long amber waves. Settle in and let the evening move slowly around you. We're not hurrying across this place tonight, only listening as the dunes explain themselves in wind, grain, shadow, and stillness. You can feel the day leaving the sand beneath you. The warmth rises gently through the soles of your feet, then fades into the cooler air. Around ERG Chebbi, the light softens from gold to copper, and every ridge becomes a quiet line against the open sky. We begin here, where the dunes stand high and calm, shaped by many small movements that almost never announce themselves. The sand doesn't arrive as a single event. It comes grain by grain, carried by winds that have crossed dry plains, stony flats and shallow desert basins. Some grains roll close to the ground, some hop in small arcs, some drift like pale dust until the air grows tired and lets them fall. You can imagine each one settling beside another, making a slope, then a crest, then a whole sea. As we stand near the first dune, you notice how quiet movement can be. The surface looks still, but the shape is always becoming itself. A faint breeze brushes your face, dry and clean, carrying the smell of sun-warmed mineral dust. It has almost no weight, and yet, over time, it has lifted this landscape into hills. ERG Chebbi is not carved quickly or dramatically. It's written slowly by wind. The dunes rise from a hard desert floor near Mazuga, where the plain is wide and open enough for sand to travel. Behind us, the land is flatter and more gravelly, with scattered stones that hold the day's heat. Ahead, the Dune Sea gathers itself in soft ridges and curved faces. You can see how the edges blur. Sand doesn't draw orders. It wanders until something in the wind asks it to rest. This is how the drift begins to feel less like motion and more like breathing. Air moves across the desert floor. Grains respond. The smallest ones lift, the heavier ones bump and roll, and the whole surface trembles in ways too fine for the eye to follow. You might hear a faint hiss when the breeze strengthens, like silk drawn slowly across stone. Then it settles again, and the silence returns. We move closer now, not climbing fast, only letting the slope rise beneath us. The sand gives way with a soft sigh under each step. It holds your foot for a moment, then releases it. In the slanted evening light, every grain catches a different warmth: orange, honey, rose, and pale brown. ERG Chebbi seems solid from a distance, but here it feels delicate, made of countless small rests. The science of this place is gentle when you let it be. Wind has a threshold, a soft beginning point where it becomes strong enough to move sand. Below that, the dunes sleep. Above it, the grains begin their low dance across the surface. This motion is called saltation, though the word sounds more formal than the movement feels. To you, it is simply sand taking short, bright steps through the air. Each hopping grain knocks against others. Those grains may roll forward, or lift briefly, or settle into tiny hollows. Over many years, those little impacts push the dune face onward. The windward side is usually long and low, a patient ramp made by incoming sand. The leeward side is steeper and softer, where grains fall beyond the crest. There the dune quietly slides into its next shape. If you watch the crest for long enough, you can almost see the dune thinking. A faint line sharpens along the top. A few grains spill over. Then, a narrow sheet loosens and runs down the sheltered face, flowing like dry water. It stops quickly, resting at the natural angle where sand can hold itself. Nothing abrupt is needed. Gravity speaks softly here, and the dune listens. And as we rise along this first slope, the whole of ERG Chebbi begins to open around us, not as a fixed monument, but as a slow record of wind. From this higher place, you can see the Dune Sea stretching in folded bands. Some ridges run like long backs through the desert. Others curve into crescent shapes, with tapered arms pointing downwind. Between them lie troughs of firmer sand, cool already in the evening shade. You feel the temperature changing with every step. Warmth lingers on the sunlit slope, while the hollows hold a blue coolness. ERG Chebbi's form depends on wind direction, sand supply, and the patience of open ground. When winds arrive mostly from one direction, dunes can migrate like slow waves. When winds shift seasonally, ridges may build higher and more complex. Here the sand has enough room to gather, but not an endless plain to vanish into. The result is a concentrated dune sea lifted high above the surrounding hamada. The hamada is the stony desert that frames the sand. It's firm beneath the scattered gravel, almost bare, and full of older surfaces. You can picture rain, rare and brief, moving over it in thin sheets, carrying loosened particles toward lower ground. Ancient streams and dry channels may have helped deliver sand-sized material into the basin. Then wind did what wind does best. It sorted, lifted, and arranged. This sorting matters. Sand dunes are not made from just any dust. They need grains large enough to fall quickly, yet small enough for wind to move. Quartz often survives this journey well, because it's hard and resistant. Feldspar and other minerals may break down more easily. Over long distances, grains become rounded, frosted, and polished by contact. The desert smooths them without hurry. You can pick up a handful and let it run through your fingers. It sounds almost like pouring fine sugar, but drier, quieter, more mineral. Some grains shine faintly, others are matte from countless collisions. Against your palm, the sand feels warm near the surface, then cooler underneath. That small difference is part of the dune's daily rhythm, as heat moves inward by day and slips away at night. We pause here because the body understands these changes before the mind explains them. Your breathing slows with the wind. The light lowers, the far ridges become less detailed, more like soft silhouettes resting in the dusk. ERG Chebbi doesn't need to be dramatic to be vast. Its scale is in repetition, in ridge after ridge, and in the patience of grains that never ask to be noticed. Below the crest, the sheltered face receives what the wind has carried, and the next layer begins where falling sand finds its quiet angle. On the lee side, the dune feels softer. Your feet sink more deeply, and each step leaves a rounded print that begins softening almost at once. This side faces away from the strongest wind. It's where the sand drops out of motion and settles into a steep, even plane. You can see little runnels where recent slides have passed, thin lines descending from the crest like whispers. The angle is not random. Dry sand can hold a slope only up to a certain steepness, often around the mid-30s in degrees, though we don't need the number to feel it. When too much sand gathers near the top, the face releases a shallow flow. It spills downward, not with force, but with the calm inevitability of water finding lower ground. Then it stops, grain against grain, balanced again. This repeated slipping is called avalanching in geomorphology, though out here the word feels too loud. It is more like the dune exhaling. A crest receives sand from the windward side. The lip grows slightly heavier, then the upper layer breaks and pours down the lee face. In that moment, the dune advances by a small distance, carrying its shape forward while leaving the desert floor behind. You can sit near the base and hear almost nothing. The world seems padded by sand. Sound doesn't travel the same way here as it does on stone or water. The dunes absorb footsteps, soften voices, and hold the air in a hushed bowl between slopes. When a breeze moves over the crest, it sometimes makes a low tone, but most of the time ERG Chebbi keeps its silence. There are traces of life, but they are small and careful. A beetle track may cross the slope in dotted lines. A plant may anchor a low mound at the dune margin. A lizard's path may appear in the cooler morning, then fade by noon. Life here often works with shade, timing, and surface texture. It doesn't interrupt the Dune Sea. It lives in the pauses between wind events. The plants matter more than they seem to at first. Where roots hold sand, the surface resists movement. Around shrubs and grasses, small dunes can form, trapping grains in their stems. These anchored patches may shape the edges of the ERG, slowing drift in some places and allowing it in others. When we look closely, even a quiet plant becomes part of the dune's long architecture. You may feel now how drift is never only one motion. It's wind lifting, grains landing, slopes slipping, roots holding, and calm returning. Every process is modest on its own. Together, they raise a Dune Sea. That is the comfort of ERG Chebbi at nightfall. It shows you how small things can gather into something immense without any need to hurry. And as we descend into the trough between dunes, the air cools further and the story of sand begins to settle closer to the ground. The trough is a softer kind of room. High slopes stand on either side, holding the last light along their upper edges. Down here, the sand is firmer where feet and wind have pressed it flat. The smell is faintly earthy, almost like warm stone after a dry day. You can feel the cool air collecting low, while the sky above grows wider and clearer. ERG Chebbi's troughs are not empty spaces. They are pathways for wind, shadows, animals, and night air. When air moves between dunes, it can accelerate gently, guided by the shape of the ridges. In some places, this scours the surface. In others, it leaves fine ripples. The Dune Sea is full of these small negotiations, where airflow changes direction and grains answer with pattern. Look at the ripples near your feet. They are tiny dunes themselves, arranged in close, even lines. Their spacing comes from the size of the grains, the strength of the wind, and the way moving particles strike the surface. Each ripple has a shallow windward side and a steeper lee side, just like the larger dune. The same principle repeats, scale within scale, quiet within quiet. You can trace one ripple with your fingertip. It collapses easily, but the pattern around it remains. By morning, if the wind rises, that small line may be gone. Another will form nearby. Nothing here is permanent in the way stone cliffs feel permanent, yet nothing is random either. The desert keeps making order from motion, then letting that order change again. This is one of the kindest lessons in a Dune Sea. A shape can be temporary and still be real. A ridge can last for years, while a ripple lasts for hours. Both belong to ERG Chebbi. Both show the direction of moving air. Both hold light in their own way. When you're tired, it can be soothing to rest inside a landscape that doesn't cling too tightly to its own forms. At the margins of the trough, you may notice darker grains gathered in thin lines. Wind can sort sand by weight and size, leaving heavier minerals in subtle streaks. These lines are sometimes called lag deposits, but you can simply see them as the desert's fine handwriting. Pale grains move farther, darker ones pause. The surface becomes a page written by balance. We continue slowly, and the dunes rise again ahead of us. The climb is gentle at first, then steeper near the crest. Behind you, your footprints are already softening along the edges. A single breeze can begin the work of erasing them. There's no harshness in that. The Dune Sea is only returning the surface to itself, smoothing the small marks of passage into the larger rhythm of drift. Beyond this low place, the next slope receives the wind more directly, and we move upward into the side of the dune that gathers the day's traveling sand. The windward face has a different texture. It's firmer, more gradual, and marked by ripples that climb toward the crest. You can walk here with less sinking. The sand presses back underfoot, compacted by countless grains arriving from the open plain. Each breath of wind has touched this surface first, combing it into fine lines that point toward the dune's upper edge. From this side, ERG Chebbi looks like a long act of accumulation. Sand approaches from surrounding source areas, moving when the air has enough strength and pausing when it doesn't. The dune face receives it without drama. Grains hop, land, hop again, and then settle into the low ramp. Over time, the ramp lengthens. The crest rises. The lee side waits for its next quiet release. The windward slope tells us about exposure. It faces the moving air, so it's constantly adjusted. Small irregularities are shaved down. Tiny hollows fill. Larger ripples shift slowly upslope. If the wind steadies for long enough, the whole surface seems to lean into one direction. You can feel it in the dry touch on your cheek, always coming from somewhere, always carrying a little memory. That memory is geographic. Before the sand reaches the dune, It may pass over dry lake beds, river sediments, weathered rock, and older dune remnants. It may be lifted from a flat that only rarely sees water. It may be reworked many times, never traveling very far in one day, yet moving far enough over seasons and years. Drift is not a straight road, it's a series of rests. Some of the sand in ERG Chebbi may have been moved and removed many times across the edge of the Sahara. A grain can be part of a riverbed, then a plain, then a dune, then a plain again. It can sleep through calm years and move during windy days. The landscape is not a single event from the past. It is an ongoing conversation between supply, climate, and air. As the sun lowers, the windward face changes color. The ripples cast longer shadows, and the ridges look sharper than they did at noon. Your hand, resting on the sand, feels warmth fading from the upper layer. Beneath it, the dune is cooler. This daily exchange of heat affects the air just above the surface, helping create small movements that come and go with evening. We stand with that movement for a while. Nothing needs to be solved. The dune is not a puzzle so much as a slow instrument, played by wind across an open desert floor. You can listen without naming every process. You can know that saltation, creep, and suspension are happening, and still feel only the soft brush of air and the gentle lift of sand at your ankles. And as the light thins across the windward slope, we follow the crest line farther, where the shape of ERG Chebbi shows how many winds can share one Dune Sea. It touches both sides of your face, first from one direction, then another, as though the dune is turning slowly beneath the sky. ERG Chebbi has been shaped by winds that do not always agree, and you can see that in the lifted ridges, the curved shoulders, and the places where one slope seems to lean across another in conversation. Some dunes are simple enough to read at a glance. They have one windward face, one crest, and one lee slope. Others are compound, carrying smaller dunes on their backs, with ripples laid over ridges and ridges laid over deeper forms. As we walk this upper line, you can feel the complexity without needing to name it. The ground rises, dips, turns, and rises again under your feet. When winds change direction through the year, sand does not simply move one way forever. A dune may receive grains from the east during one season, then from another quarter later on. Its crest can sharpen, soften, or even shift position. Small slip faces may appear on more than one side. In ERG Chebbi, this gives the Dune Sea a layered feeling, as if the wind has written several slow sentences over the same page. You notice how the crest is never perfectly still. It may look like a clean line from below, but here it's a narrow zone of fine changes. A small cornice forms, then breaks. A fingertip of sand pours down the lee face. The top edge bends slightly where the breeze crosses at an angle. You can imagine the dune not as a wall, but as a long, soft instrument being tuned by air. We pause with the evening around us. The sand under your hand is losing its heat, but the air above it still carries a faint warmth. Far away, the stony plain darkens more quickly than the dunes, because stone releases heat differently than sand. The scent of dust becomes cooler and thinner. You can feel the desert settling into night, and the crest becomes a place of listening. This is where sand drift feels most visible. Even though it remains slow, every grain that crosses the crest is part of a larger transfer from one side to the other. It arrives at the edge, pauses briefly, then falls into shelter. If enough grains do this, day after day, the dune migrates. It keeps its general shape while moving through the world, as a wave keeps its form while water passes through it. Yet ERG Chebbi is not a single dune traveling alone. It's a field of forms, each affecting the wind that reaches the next. A tall ridge can shelter a trough. A low saddle can funnel air into a narrow current. A curved dune arm can trap sand that might otherwise pass beyond the ERG. When you look across the field, you are seeing many small decisions made by moving air. And as we follow this high line, the sky grows dimmer, and the dunes begin to reveal what shape means when light becomes scarce. At dusk, the Dune Sea changes by shadow first. The sun touches only the upper ridges, and the lower faces fall into cool blue. You can still see ERG Chebbi clearly, but its details are gentler now, less separate, more continuous. The crest ahead of us glows for a while, then dulls to copper, and the whole landscape seems to draw one long breath. Shadows are not just absence here. They show the angle of slopes, the depth of troughs, and the hidden curves between ridges. In low light, a shallow ripple can look sharp, and a high dune can seem almost weightless. Your eyes adjust slowly. The strongest colors leave first, then the softer tones remain. Gray, rose, brown, and a faint lavender resting over the sand. The science of light is quiet too. Sand grains scatter sunlight according to their size, color, and mineral surface. Iron-stained particles can warm the dune with red and orange tones. Pale quartz can brighten the face and reflect the day back into the air. When the sun is low, its light travels farther through the atmosphere, and the dunes receive it already softened by distance. You feel this softness on your skin. The heat no longer presses upward as strongly. The wind has cooled, and it slides along the crest with a dry, steady touch. Somewhere lower down, a tiny movement of sand makes a sound like breath against paper. You may not know whether the sound came from the slope, the breeze, or your own step, and it doesn't matter. It belongs to the evening. ERG Chebbi at this hour reminds you that geology is not always stone-hard and remote. Sometimes it's loose enough to run through your fingers. Sometimes it's shaped in darkness while no one watches. The dunes hold no single finished form, but they still feel ancient because the processes that make them are older than any path across them. Wind has been doing this work for longer than memory. We move slowly along the ridge, letting the shadows gather. The dune's upper surface remains faintly warm, while the hollows below are already cool. This temperature difference can matter after sunset, as denser air begins to sink and slide down slopes. You may feel a delicate change at your ankles, a small flow of cooler air pooling lower in the trough. That downslope movement is not the main builder of the dunes, but it belongs to their nightly rhythm. Deserts breathe with heat. During the day, surfaces warm quickly. At night, they cool quickly under clear skies. Sand, air, and stone exchange warmth in careful steps. You can feel those steps now, not as facts, but as a quiet release from the day. And as night comes down across the crest, we descend again into the sheltered side, where the dune keeps the last warmth in its deeper layers. The lee slope is darker now, and your feet find it by pressure more than sight. Each step sinks a little, and the sand folds around your soles with a soft granular murmur. ERG Chebbi seems larger in the fading light because the edges are less certain. The dune beside us becomes less like a hill and more like a presence, calm, broad, and near. Down this sheltered face, sand has fallen in thin sheets many times. You can see faint overlapping scars where grains once slid from crest to base. Some are fresh, their surfaces smooth and even. Others are older, softened by ripples or crossed by insect tracks. Each slide resets part of the slope, making a clean plane where gravity briefly took over from wind. The grains on this side may be more loosely packed than those on the windward face. They have arrived by falling, not by being pressed and combed by incoming airflow. That looseness changes the way your step feels. The dune yields more deeply. The surface whispers, then settles. If you pause, the print remains dark for a moment, because disturbed sand reflects light differently from the untouched skin around it. We can think of the lee face as a receiving place. It accepts whatever the crest cannot hold. It grows grain by grain until it becomes too steep. Then it adjusts itself. This is not collapse in any dramatic sense. It is balance returning. The slope finds the angle where friction, gravity, and grain shape can rest together, and the dune becomes stable again until more sand arrives. The shape of each grain matters in this resting. Rounded grains slide more easily. Angular grains may lock together a little more. Moisture, even a faint trace from dew, can bind the surface for a short time. In the desert, small amounts of water have strong effects, because they change the contact between grains. You can imagine a cool night leaving a delicate crust that the morning wind must loosen. This is part of ERG Chebbi's quieter cycle. At night, surface is cool. Moisture may condense lightly if the air allows it. By day, the sun dries the surface again, and the wind can return to its work. The Dune Sea doesn't need constant motion to remain alive. Its stillness is also part of the process. Rest prepares the next movement, and movement prepares the next rest. You may notice the smell of the sand has changed. It is less sun-warmed now, more mineral and clean, with a faint dry sweetness that rises when the surface is disturbed. The air has widened around us. Sound from far away travels differently in the cooling desert, sometimes clearer, sometimes swallowed by the folds of sand. Your breathing feels slow inside this space. At the base of the slope, small accumulations gather where falling sand comes to rest. They form low aprons, smoothing the transition into the trough. If the wind later enters this hollow, it may pick some of that sand up again and carry it onward. The dune is never one act, it is a long circulation, a return and departure, a drift that keeps changing its own paths. And as we reach the foot of the lee slope, the night air settles around us, and the Dune Sea begins to show the smaller lives that share its surface. You start to notice the small tracks first. They cross the cooler sand in careful lines, some straight, some wavering, some paired with tiny marks from feet or tails. ERG Chebbi may seem empty from a distance, but the surface remembers the night's movements. A beetle has passed, a small reptile has turned, perhaps a fox or rodent has crossed the trough, leaving prints that soften at the edges. These creatures live with the dune's changes rather than against them. Many move when the surface is cooler, using darkness as a shelter from heat and openness. Their bodies are tuned to dryness, timing, and texture. They know the firmness of a crust, the softness of fresh slip sand, and the slight shelter offered by a dune's shaded side. They read this landscape in ways our feet only begin to understand. You can kneel and look closely at a track before it fades. Each mark is a short record of weight, direction, and surface condition. On firmer windward sand, prints may be shallow and crisp. On the lee face, they may slump almost at once. After a breeze they blur. After a stronger wind they disappear. The Dune Sea keeps memory, but it keeps it lightly. Plants along the margins do the same kind of quiet work. They hold sand around their roots, soften the wind at ground level, and create small islands of stability. Seeds may rest in the sand until rare moisture wakes them. Dry stems may trap grains and begin a low mound. You can see how life and drift cooperate, not loudly, but through contact, shelter, and patience. The science here is called feedback. Though the word is plainer than the feeling, a plant changes airflow. Changed airflow changes where sand settles. Settled sand changes the plant's small environment. More shelter may allow more growth, or too much burial may ask the plant to stretch upward. The dunes and the living things shape one another in slow exchange. You can imagine the edge of ERG Chebbi as a breathing border, not a hard line. In some seasons, sand advances over small surfaces. In others, vegetation holds it back. Human paths and animal paths may press the surface, while wind loosens it again. Rain, when it comes, may briefly darken the sand, bind it and trace shallow channels before the desert dries. Even the smallest organisms can matter at the surface. In some arid landscapes, biological crusts form where cyanobacteria, lichens, or tiny fungi bind grains together. They may be sparse near active dunes, but where the sand steadies, a living skin can begin. You don't need to see it clearly to understand the idea. Life often begins as something almost invisible, holding the ground with quiet threads. We sit with that thought for a moment. The Dune Sea looks vast because it is vast, but it is also intimate at the scale of a single grain, a root hair, a beetle foot, or a trace of dew. You can feel your own presence becoming lighter here. The desert doesn't ask you to be important. It only lets you rest inside its slow relations. And as the night deepens over the trough, We turn toward the older ground beyond the dunes, where the sand's journey began before it reached this place. Beyond the soft edge of ERG Chebbi, the land becomes firmer. The sand thins, and stones begin to appear underfoot, smooth, dark, and scattered across the surface. You can feel the change through your soles. The ground no longer yields in the same way. It holds its shape, keeping the day's warmth in patches, while the dune behind us glows faintly under the rising stars. This stony desert helps explain the Dune Sea. Not every desert surface becomes a dune field. Some places have too little sand. Others have too much vegetation, too much moisture, or winds that carry grains away without letting them gather. An erg forms where sand is available, where wind can move it, and where the land allows accumulation. ERG Chebbi exists because those conditions have met here over time. The surrounding plains may seem plain only at first glance. They hold old sediments, broken rock, dry channels, and surfaces worked by weathering. Heat expands stone by day and lets it contract at night. Rare water enters cracks and carries particles downslope. Wind removes finer dust and leaves heavier gravel behind. Slowly, the ground sorts itself into textures that you can see and feel. Some sand may come from distant sources, and some from nearby weathered deposits. Grains can be freed from sandstone, river, alluvium, or older sediments already reduced to sand size. Once loosened, they don't necessarily travel far in one motion. They pause behind stones, gather in shallow hollows, or move onward when the wind strengthens. The journey is intermittent, and that makes it feel more human somehow. You know what it is to move by pauses. A day can carry you only so far before you need to rest. A grain of sand is not alive, but its path has a rhythm that feels familiar. Lift, fall, rest, lift again. The Dune Sea is made from those small repetitions. It's an ancient landscape built from almost ordinary gestures. On the stony plain, the wind sounds slightly different. It has less soft sand to absorb it, so it brushes around stones with a faint, dry rasp. The smell is sharper, more like hot rock cooling into night. If you touch a dark pebble, it may still be warmer than the air. If you touch the sand beside it, the warmth has already begun to leave. This contrast helps the desert move. Different surfaces heat and cool at different rates, creating small pressure differences near the ground. Larger weather patterns bring stronger winds, of course, but local textures shape how those winds behave at the surface. A stone can shelter a tail of sand. A shallow depression can catch grains. A flat hard pan can let them race onward with less resistance. We look back toward ERG Chebbi from this firmer ground. The dunes rise like a sleeping tide at the edge of the plain. Their crests are darker now, their faces softened by night. It's easy to imagine the sand arriving grain by grain, drawn from the wider desert into this held place. The Dune Sea is not separate from the plain. It is the plain lifted into motion, and as we return toward the dunes, the moonlight begins to touch the crests, and the surface becomes a map of pale lines and deep blue hollows. Moonlight changes the way you see sand. It removes the warmth of color and leaves shape behind. ERG Chebbi becomes silver-gray along the ridges, with shadow pooled in the troughs. The ripples near your feet look like delicate waves, frozen for a little while in the cool air. Each line catches light on one side and releases it on the other, making a soft pattern across the ground. In this light, the Dune Sea feels almost underwater, though it remains completely dry. The air is still enough to seem dense. The slopes rise around you like slow swells. Your own movement feels quieter, because moonlit landscapes ask for smaller steps. We follow the ripples, and they lead us back toward the body of the dune, where the crest shines faintly above. The comparison to water is not accidental. Wind and water both move sediment by flow, though their densities and forces differ. A river can carry grains in current. Air carries them with less strength, but over open ground it has time. Dunes are bed forms, shaped by moving fluid. and their ripples echo patterns found under streams, on beaches, and along tidal flats. The desert remembers flow, yet wind leaves its own signature. It lifts grains into little hops that water would not repeat in the same way. It sorts the surface into fine textures. It builds slip faces that can shift when crests oversteepen. Where water might carve channels, wind makes ridges that migrate, merge and separate. ERG Chebbi is a landscape of invisible currents made visible in sand. You can feel one of those currents now as a light breeze returns. It doesn't disturb the whole dune, it only combs the surface. A few grains tap against your ankle. A faint line of sand moves across a ripple crest and disappears into shadow. The sound is very small, but in the night it seems enough. The dune is speaking in particles. We walk with the breeze, not against it. Your steps follow the same direction as the drifting grains, and for a moment you are part of the transport. The wind touches your back. Sand slides forward at ground level. The crest ahead receives what the surface offers. This is how the ERG continues, not through force, but through countless alignments that come and go. Moonlight also reveals the smoothness of older slip faces. A recent slide may appear unmarked, almost satin. An older face is crossed by ripples, tracks, or small irregularities. The dune keeps time in surfaces. Newness is smooth. Age is textured. Then wind arrives and changes the order. You can't hold a single moment in the Dune Sea, but you can rest inside the changing. And as the breeze carries us onward, we climb toward a higher ridge, where the great shape of ERG Chebbi can be felt as both landscape and process. The higher ridge rises slowly at first. Your legs feel the incline, but the sand is cool now, and the climb has a calm rhythm. Step, sink, lift and settle. The dune gives and receives you, pressing softly around your feet. Above, the crest becomes a clean pale line against the sky, while behind you, the trough grows deeper and more silent. From a high point, ERG Chebbi gathers into a larger pattern. The ridges are not isolated hills. They are arranged by dominant winds, by available sand, and by the shape of the surrounding basin. Some run nearly parallel for a while, others meet or bend. Smaller dunes ride on larger ones, and ripples ride on all of them. The whole field is nested movement. Geomorphologists may describe these forms by type, by orientation, by migration rate, or by the balance of winds that formed them. But as we stand here, the terms can soften into images. A crescent dune suggests steady winds and limited sand. A long ridge suggests directional persistence, or the meeting of wind regimes. A star-like mound suggests winds arriving from more than one quarter over time. The exact forms of ERG Chebbi vary across the field, and that variation is part of its beauty. You don't need every dune to match. In fact, the difference is what lets the landscape breathe. One ridge offers a smooth windward ramp, another has a broken crest, a smaller dune leans against a larger flank. You begin to see the ERG as a community of shapes. The pressure of the air is light tonight, and the wind is gentle. Pressure in a desert is not like the pressure of the deep sea, but you can still feel the atmosphere touching everything. It presses on the sand, moves around slopes, and changes with weather patterns far beyond this place. The Dune Sea is local, but the air that shapes it belongs to larger systems. Some winds may arrive after crossing mountains, plains, or dry basins. Others may follow seasonal shifts in regional circulation. Their strength and direction determine whether sand moves, rests, or reverses slightly. A single calm day does little. A windy season may matter more. Over many years, the dune field records these patterns in ways that are visible from above and tangible underfoot. You can imagine time stretched out like the dark sky above us. In one night, a ripple may move. In one season, a slip face may renew itself. In many years, a crest may shift enough to be measured. Across longer spans, the ERG may expand, contract, or reorganize as climate and sand supply change. Nothing here has only one scale of time. We sit near the high crest, and the sand is cool beneath us now. Your body settles into it. The dune supports your weight, by distributing it across countless grains, each one touching others in a hidden network. Even softness has structure. Even a place that changes constantly has a way of holding you. And as we rest on this high ridge, the darkness around ERG Chebbi becomes deeper, and the origin of each grain feels farther away and more peaceful. A grain of sand can begin as part of a mountain, though by the time it reaches your palm, the mountain is only memory. Weathering frees it, water may carry it, wind may lift it again. It may spend years in a riverbed, centuries in a plain, or longer still in older sediment before joining ERG Chebbi. Its path is not straight, and that wandering gives it softness. When you let a few grains slide from one hand to the other, you're holding the end of many quiet transformations. Rock has become fragment. Fragment has become grain. Grain has become dune. The process is physical, but it carries a strange tenderness. The world breaks down, and from that breaking, it makes surfaces where light can rest. Chemical weathering, mechanical weathering, and abrasion all play their parts. Minerals respond differently to heat, water, and time. Quartz often remains when other minerals weaken, which is why many desert sands are rich in it. Iron oxides can stain grains with warmer colors. Clay and dust may be lifted away more easily, leaving sand behind to form the larger shapes we see. The wind then becomes a sorter. It cannot carry everything equally. Fine dust may rise high and travel far, sometimes leaving the desert entirely. Coarser grains may roll or creep close to the ground. Sand-sized particles perform the hopping motion that builds dunes most effectively. In that middle size, the desert finds its builder, neither too light nor too heavy for drift. You can feel the difference if you imagine dust on your skin and sand under your palm. Dust coats, sand gathers, gravel stays. Each size has a different relationship with air. ERG Chebbi exists because enough grains fall into the range that wind can move and redeposit. The Dune Sea is a product of selection, repeated so many times that it becomes landscape. There is a comfort in this slow selecting. The wind doesn't choose as a mind chooses. It responds to weight, shape, speed, and surface. Yet the result is almost graceful. Finer particles leave. Larger ones remain. Sand gathers into dunes. The world sorts itself through simple rules, and those rules make something that can fill the horizon. As night deepens, the grains lose their individual color. In your hand, they become a pale gray stream. You feel them more than you see them. They run between your fingers with a dry, gentle pressure, then join the larger dune without a sound. Nothing is lost. The handful returns to the whole. We stay with that return. Your shoulders relax. The sky opens. The dune beneath you is both ancient and temporary, made from pieces of older landscapes and shaped by winds that will not keep still. It's enough to rest in that thought, because it asks nothing. It only shows how change can be slow enough to feel like peace. And as the cool settles more deeply into the sand, we move down toward the foot of the ridge, where traces of rare water still belong to the story of drift. Water is not absent from ERG Chebbi's story. Even though the Dune Sea feels dry in your hands, rare rains may pass over the region, brief and widely spaced, darkening the sand and waking low channels in the surrounding ground. You can imagine the scent then, mineral and sudden, rising from dust and stone. But tonight, only the memory of water rests beneath the dryness. When rain falls on desert surfaces, it can do several quiet things. It can bind loose sand for a little while, making the surface firmer. It can wash fine particles into shallow depressions. It can carry sediment from nearby slopes and plains toward lower areas. Later, when the surface dries, wind may rework those deposits. In this way, water gives material to wind, and wind gives form to sand. Dry riverbeds, or wadis, can act as temporary pathways for sediment. Most of the time they may lie empty, their beds pale and stony beneath the sky. After rain, water may move through them briefly, carrying sand, silt, and gravel. When the flow ends, sediment remains. Then the air returns, touches the surface, and begins sorting again. The Dune Sea is fed by more than one element. You can see how a landscape can be dry and still shaped by water. It does not need constant streams. It needs moments, rare but effective, that loosen, transport and deposit. Between those moments, wind has long quiet intervals to work. ERG Chebbi rises from this partnership of scarcity and time, where even an infrequent rain can leave something for the next season's breeze. The thought of rain here feels soft, not dramatic. Picture a low grey sky over the dunes, the sand darkening as drops enter the surface. Ripples blur, tracks vanish. The steep faces hold together differently while damp. Then, slowly, the air clears, the sun returns, and the uppermost grains dry first. The dune wakes from the top downward, ready again for motion. At the base of the ridge, the sand may feel slightly firmer in places where older moisture once helped pack it. A crust can form and break. A hollow can hold a trace of fine sediment. A small plant may find enough moisture to root, and in rooting begin to trap sand. These small effects can shape the margins of the dune field over time. We follow one shallow swale, where the ground dips between two dune arms. The sand is smoother here, and the air is cooler. If water ever crossed this place, it left no obvious stream tonight, only a subtle firmness underfoot. Still, you can imagine how flow might briefly gather in a low line, then disappear into the porous sand, leaving behind a faint change in texture. This is one reason dune landscapes reward slow attention. Their features are often quiet. A change in firmness, a darker streak, a line of plants, or a shallow hollow can hold part of the story. You don't need to hurry through them. You can let each sign arrive at the edge of awareness and settle there with the same patience as the sand itself. And as we leave the swale behind, the dunes gather closer again, and the wind begins to show how shelter and exposure live side by side. A narrow pass between dunes holds the air differently. The breeze strengthens slightly as it moves through, not sharply, but enough for you to feel it along your sleeves and face. ERG Chebbi is full of these small corridors. One side is exposed to the moving air, the other rests in lee shadow. Between them, the wind becomes shaped by the dunes it helped make. This is a beautiful feedback in the Dune Sea. Wind builds the dune, and the dune redirects the wind. Redirected wind moves sand into new positions. Those new positions change the next flow. The process continues without a central plan, and yet the landscape gains coherence. You can see it in the way ridges align, in how troughs are swept clean, and in how sand accumulates behind obstacles. In a pass like this, grains may move faster near the center of the flow. Along the edges, where the air slows, sand may settle. Small tongues of sand can extend into the sheltered zone. Ripples may curve around the base of a slope. If a shrub stands nearby, the airflow divides around it, and a little mound forms downwind or at its base. You can place your hand close to the surface and feel how the breeze differs there. Near the ground, friction slows the air. A little higher, it moves more freely. Sand transport mostly happens in this lower zone, where grains hop, strike, and rebound. The whole Dune Sea is built close to the ground. Within a layer you could touch with your fingers. That nearness makes the process feel intimate. Vast dunes rise from motions that happen at ankle height. The high crests of ERG Chebbi depend on low, repeated contacts between air and grain. You might look across the Dune Sea and feel its height first, but its building begins near your feet in a thin moving veil of sand. The pass opens into another hollow. The wind relaxes. The surface becomes smoother. You can hear the difference in the quiet as the faint hiss of moving grains falls away. Your breathing fills the space again. The night feels deeper here, held between slopes that block part of the sky and make the stars seem farther above. In sheltered hollows, sand can rest longer. Tracks may last until the next wind. Fine grains may settle gently out of suspension. If dew forms, the surface may become lightly bound by morning. These zones of rest are as important as exposed slopes. A Dune Sea is not all movement. It is movement arranged around pause. We stand inside that pause and let it work on us. The body, too, has windward sides and sheltered sides. Some parts of the day receive everything directly. Others wait in the quiet. In ERG Chebbi, you can feel how both are necessary, how exposure shapes and shelter preserves. and how rest is part of every lasting form. And as the hollow widens, the dune walls lower around us, and we begin to sense the larger basin that gives the sand a place to gather. A dune sea needs a receiving shape. It needs land that can hold sand long enough for wind to build it upward. Around ERG Chebbi, the broader desert surface creates that possibility. The ERG rises at the edge of open plains and low relief, where grains can accumulate instead of being swept endlessly onward. You can feel the basin more than see it now, as a wide holding under the night. Basins do not have to be deep to matter. Even subtle changes in slope can guide sediment. A gentle low area may collect material from surrounding ground. A slight barrier, a change in surface roughness, or a shift in wind pattern can slow transport. Once sand begins to gather, it roughens the surface further, encouraging more deposition. The Dune Sea begins as an invitation to more sand. This is another quiet threshold. A few scattered patches may become small mounds. Small mounds alter airflow. Altered airflow traps more grains. Over time, separate accumulations can merge into a larger dune field. ERG Chebbi's present form may feel complete when you stand within it, but it is part of this ongoing balance between incoming sand, outgoing sand, and places where sand stays. You can picture the first low deposits, though no one here tonight can point to their exact beginning. Sand would have gathered where conditions allowed, forming small rippled patches on a hard plain. Later, more supply, more wind, and more time built larger forms. The Dune Sea rose gradually, not as an arrival, but as a becoming. The basin also influences moisture, vegetation, and surface crusts. Lower areas may briefly hold water after rain or allow finer sediments to settle. Slightly firmer surfaces can resist erosion until they dry and break. Vegetation may appear where conditions are just favorable enough, adding roughness and trapping sand. Every small variation creates another way for drift to slow, gather, or pass through. We walk across a flatter patch where the sand feels packed and cool. The stars above are steady. The dunes around us are dark, with only their crests touched by moonlight. It's easy to forget that this calm surface may become active when the wind returns. Tonight, it rests. Tomorrow, or another day, grains may begin their quiet travel again. The ancient beauty of ERG Chebbi lies partly in this balance. It isn't permanent like a mountain ridge, but it isn't fleeting like a single footprint. It lives between those scales. It changes enough to breathe, yet endures enough to become a place you can name, return to, and remember. That middle kind of time is soothing, and as we cross the basin floor between the dunes, the sand grows finer underfoot, and the patterns near the surface become smaller, closer, and more delicate. The ripples here are low and close together. They look like careful brushstrokes laid across the night sand. When you move beside them, the shadows shift, and the surface seems to shimmer without actually moving. ERG Chebbi holds many textures at once, from high slip faces to these tiny lines, and each one speaks of wind at a different scale. Ripple formation begins with disturbance. A smooth sand bed meets moving air, and small irregularities create tiny zones of shelter and impact. Grains bouncing across the surface tend to land in certain places, building low ridges. Once a ripple exists, it affects the flow and gathers more grains on one side, while losing them on the other. Slowly the ripple migrates. The spacing of ripples depends on grain size and wind conditions. Coarser sand may form wider patterns. Finer sand may show tighter ones. Stronger winds can modify or erase what gentler winds made. You can see this layering in places where old ripples lie faintly beneath new ones, their directions crossing like quiet memories of air from another hour. You kneel close, and the sand smells faintly cool. Your breath stirs a few grains near the surface, though most remain still. In moonlight, the ripple crests are pale threads. Between them, the troughs are soft gray. Touch one line lightly, and it breaks under your finger, reminding you that the most ordered patterns here are made from the loosest materials. This fragility is not weakness, it is responsiveness. The Dune Sea can change because it isn't locked into place. It can receive wind, heat, moisture, and touch. It can lose a pattern and make another. ERG Chebbi teaches this without speaking. A surface can be easily altered and still belong to something vast, old and whole. Sometimes the ripples climb a larger slope and bend around small obstacles. A pebble, twig, or plant stem can create a tiny wake, with sand gathered behind it. These miniature forms mirror larger aerodynamic effects across the dune field. The same principles repeat in a way that feels almost musical. The desert plays one theme at many sizes. We continue beside the ripple field, careful not to hurry. Your steps leave broad, soft impressions that interrupt the fine lines. Soon, wind will smooth them. For now, they are part of the surface record, no more important than a beetle track, no less real than a crest shadow. The dune receives every mark with the same quiet patience. And as the ripples lead us toward another rising slope, the wind falls nearly still, and we enter the deepest quiet of the night Dune Sea. When the wind pauses, ERG Chebbi seems to stop breathing. The dunes remain, of course, and the sand still holds its slopes, but the moving voice of the surface goes silent. You can hear your clothing shift, your foot settle, your breath leave and return. The silence is not empty. It has texture, a deep, dry hush held between the ridges. In still air, sand transport nearly ceases. Grains rest where the last movement left them. Ripples remain sharp. Slip faces hold their recent slides. Fine dust may settle slowly from the air, too light to announce itself. The Dune Sea becomes a record of previous winds, waiting for the next one. This waiting can last hours, days, or longer, depending on weather and season. You might think of stillness as the opposite of change, but here it is part of change's rhythm. A dune cannot move continuously without wind, and it cannot keep its form without periods of rest. Rest allows slopes to hold, crusts to form, tracks to remain, and heat to leave the surface. The calm is not outside the system, it belongs to the process. Your body understands this. After a long day, you don't need another motion. You need a surface that can hold you. The dune offers that by being soft, yet structured, shifting, yet supportive. You can sit against the lower slope and feel sand gather around your hips and hands. It conforms gently, then stays. The night sky above the Dune Sea is clear enough to make distance visible. Stars seem to hang over every crest. The Milky Way, if the air is dark enough, would look like another pale drift, a band of light across the upper darkness. Below it, ERG Chebbi rests in its own pale bands, sand echoing sky, sky echoing sand. There is no need to make the landscape into a lesson, but lessons rise from it anyway. The dunes show how form can come from repetition. They show how the smallest movements can build a place large enough to quiet the mind. They show how being shaped by the world is not always a violent thing. Sometimes it's almost tender. We remain in the stillness for a little while. The cool deepens through your clothing. The sand against your palm no longer feels warm, only dry and fine. If you move your fingers, grains fall into the small hollow you make, filling it without hesitation. The surface returns to balance, as it always does. And as we rise from this sheltered rest, the eastern side of the dune begins to pale slightly under the moon, and the night reveals another face of drift. On this side the slope is less steep and more exposed, with ripples running diagonally across it. The moonlight lies along the ridges, making each line visible for a moment as we pass. ERG Chebbi feels less like one direction here, more like a meeting of angles. You can sense how wind from different times has crossed the surface and left a patterned memory. Cross-bedding, hidden inside older dunes and sandstones, forms from these migrating slip faces. If a dune were buried, compacted, and eventually turned to rock, its internal layers could preserve the angles of ancient drift. Geologists read those layers in sandstone elsewhere, seeing old winds and vanished dune fields in slanted bands. The living dunes of ERG Chebbi show the same process before it becomes stone. You can imagine slicing gently through a dune, not as harm, but as understanding. Inside, layers would tilt in the direction of former lee slopes. Each avalanche down the slip face would add another sheet. Over time, these sheets stack together. Later winds may cut across them and build new layers at different angles. The dune keeps its history inside, not just on its surface. Tonight, we see only the outside. Still, the surface suggests what is hidden. A smooth face tells of recent settling. A ripple field tells of near-surface wind. A crest line tells of transport from one side to another. Beneath your feet, older layers rest unseen, holding past positions of the same shifting form. There is depth in sand, even when it feels loose. This thought makes the Dune Sea feel older again, not because any single ridge must remain unchanged, but because the process can repeat through ages. Dunes can become sandstone. Sandstone can weather back into sand. Grains can return to the cycle. The landscape is not a line from beginning to end. It is a slow turning, where matter changes state and story. Your hand brushes the slope. A small fan of sand runs downward, leaving a lighter mark. It may cover a ripple, or expose a slightly different grain mix beneath. The mark is tiny, and still it follows the same physics as a larger slide. The dune does not separate small gestures from large ones. It lets them belong to the same law. We continue across the angled face, and the sand holds our steps more firmly again. The breeze has not returned, but the slope remembers it. Everything around us is a record of air, even in stillness. That is the quiet strangeness of ERG Chebbi, that an invisible thing has made such visible forms. And as the slope carries us down toward the margin, we begin to feel where the Dune Sea thins and the wider desert takes back the ground. The edge of the ERG is gradual. Sand does not end suddenly. It thins into sheets, patches, tongues, and small mounds held by stones and plants. ERG Chebbi becomes less towering here, but its presence remains in the ripples that cross the surface and the soft grains caught against every obstacle. You can feel the land changing from dune to plain with careful slowness. At the margin, transport can be especially complex. Sand may arrive from the main dune field, then be trapped by vegetation or rough ground. It may also be lifted from the plain and drawn into the ERG. Wind direction, surface texture, and seasonal conditions decide which way the balance leans. Margins are not borders, they are zones of exchange. You see a low shrub with sand gathered around its base. Its branches make a dark shape against the moonlit ground. On the windward side, the surface may be scoured slightly. On the leeward side, grains settle where the air slows. Over time, the plant may stand on a small mound, or become partly buried and grow upward through the sand. Life and drift continue their quiet negotiation. A few dry stems brush your ankle as you pass. They feel brittle, but they have held through sun, wind, and long dry intervals. Their roots enter the sand in search of hidden moisture. Their presence roughens the surface, slowing the wind near the ground. Even a sparse plant can alter the path of many grains. Nothing here needs to be large to matter. The edge also shows how easily sand can move beyond the Dune Sea when conditions allow. Strong winds may carry grains across low areas or peel sand from exposed slopes. If supply decreases or vegetation increases, parts of a dune field may stabilize. If supply increases or vegetation retreats, active sand may expand. ERG Chebbi rests within these balances, shaped by both climate and surface. You can feel the difference between active and steadier sand underfoot. Active sand is clean, loose, and responsive. More stable patches may be crusted, mixed with finer sediment, or marked by tiny plant remains. The color may shift slightly. The texture may feel firmer. These changes are subtle, but once you notice them, the ground becomes a soft language. We linger at the margin because it's a place of transition, and transitions are gentle in this landscape. Dune becomes sheet. Sheet becomes stony plain. Plain feeds dune again. There is no sharp ending, only a widening of texture and possibility. The desert prefers gradients, and so do tired minds. And as we turn back toward the higher sand, the night has grown cooler, and the Dune Sea waits with its broad slopes open under the stars. We move back from the margin with the dunes rising ahead, and the sand begins to loosen beneath your feet again. The plain falls away behind us in a dark, stony hush. ERG Chebbi gathers us into its softer ground, where each step returns to that slow rhythm of sinking, lifting, and settling into coolness. The night has deepened enough that shapes come before details. A high ridge is first only a darker mass against the sky. Then the moon finds one shoulder of it, and the slope appears, pale and smooth. The trough at its base remains blue and quiet. You can feel how the Dune Sea holds darkness differently from the plain, not as emptiness, but as depth made from shadow. Sand drift is still present, even in the calm. It rests in the angle of the slope, in the curve of the crest, in the way smaller ripples climb the larger body. Every form was made by movement, and every form waits for movement to return. ERG Chebbi is full of this peaceful waiting. It doesn't feel unfinished. It feels alive in a very slow way. We follow the base of the ridge, where loose sand has gathered in a broad apron. Your feet press into the cooler surface, and the sound is low and padded. The grains shift around your soles, then settle again, smoothing the edges of your footprints. The air smells dry, mineral and faintly sweet, the way desert sand can smell after giving up the heat of the day. At this hour, you can feel the daily temperature wave leaving the dune. The upper layers cool first under the open sky. Deeper down, warmth remains longer, held between grains and released slowly. If you dig your fingers a little way into the slope, the sand may feel different below the surface, a hidden softness that still remembers sunlight. The dune keeps the day inside it for a while. This stored warmth affects the living world too. Small animals may choose warmer or cooler layers depending on the hour. Seeds may remain protected beneath the surface. Roots may find a slightly steadier temperature below the shifting skin. A dune is not only a shape in air, it is also a shallow, layered shelter of heat, dryness, and texture. As we walk, the slope beside us shows faint bands where recent slides have overlapped. Some bands are smoother than others. Some catch the moonlight with a slightly different tone. These are not permanent stripes, but they reveal how the dune face has renewed itself. Each thin sheet of sliding grains becomes part of a layered body that wind will reshape again. And as we move along the base, the sand grows smoother, and a low sound begins to seem possible in the stillness, like the dune remembering its own voice. Some dunes can sing when dry grains slide together in the right conditions. The sound is often low, sustained, and strange, but tonight we hold it gently, as a possibility rather than a spectacle. ERG Chebbi is known by many visitors for the voice of moving sand. Yet here, in the quiet, we listen without asking the dune to perform. The silence is enough. The science of singing sand depends on grain size, dryness, shape, and synchronized movement. When many similar grains slide together, their collisions can produce vibrations that travel through the dune. A slope must be dry and loose enough. The grains must have surfaces that interact in a particular way. The sound rises not from mystery alone, but from contact repeated many times at once. You can imagine a shallow sheet, releasing near the crest. Grains tumble down together, rubbing and colliding. A vibration begins in the moving layer, then passes into the dune body beneath it. The sand acts like a resonant surface, carrying the tone for a short while. Nothing sudden is needed. It is simply the audible form of drift becoming more unified. Tonight, the slope remains mostly still. A few grains may slide when your foot disturbs them, but they settle without song. That small absence is peaceful. The dune's voice is not required for the dune to be present. Its quieter sounds are here already. The soft hush of steps, the faint tap of a rolling grain, the dry breath of wind across the crest. We pause and place a hand against the slope. Sand gives way, then supports you. If a deep tone lived inside it, this is where you might feel it first. Not as sound through the ear, but as vibration through the palm. The thought is calming. Even silence has hidden structures. Even quiet ground may be full of potential. In a dune sea, sound depends so much on texture. Wet sand sounds different from dry sand. Coarse grains rasp where fine grains whisper. Firm crusts crunch lightly, while loose lee slopes sigh. Your body hears these differences through your feet, as much as your ears. Walking across ERG Chebbi becomes a slow listening, every surface offering a slightly different note. The wind remains low, and the night gives us only small sounds. A ripple edge collapses under your step. A grain rolls down a tiny groove. Your breath moves in and out with the same patience as the dunes around you. We do not need more. The desert is already speaking in its smallest possible language. And as we leave the listening slope behind, we follow a long ridge whose curve shows how the Dune Sea turns with the winds that have shaped it. The ridge ahead arcs gently, not like a perfect crescent, but like a line softened by many corrections. ERG Chebbi rarely gives you one simple answer. Its forms are layered by shifting winds, uneven sand supply, and interactions between neighboring dunes. You can feel the curve underfoot as the slope turns, and the horizon slowly opens to another angle. A dune's plan view, the shape it makes when seen from above, can tell a patient observer about wind regime. Where wind mostly comes from one direction, crescentic forms may travel across the surface. Where winds reverse or cross at oblique angles, ridges can elongate or build upward. Where several directions contribute over time, dunes can grow more complex with arms, spurs, and changing crests. Here on the ridge, those ideas become touchable. One side seems to have received sand recently. Another side has older ripples crossing it at a different angle. The crest bends, then straightens, then bends again. You can see how the dune has responded to winds that arrived not as a single command, but as a series of suggestions. Wind has memory only through what it leaves behind. It passes and is gone, but the sand remains in altered form. A ripple points one way, a slip face leans another, a hollow is swept clean, a small mound gathers behind a plant. In this way, ERG Chebbi preserves air without holding the air itself, which is a gentle kind of remembering. You may notice that the higher slopes feel more exposed, even in calm. The air is cooler around your face, the sky seems broader, the sand underfoot is sometimes firmer where the wind has pressed and arranged it, then suddenly softer near the crest where loose grains have accumulated. Your body reads exposure and shelter as a changing pressure in every step. A strong wind, on another day, would move more sand along this ridge. Grains would saltate across the surface, tapping and rebounding. Some would climb the windward face, some would spill over the crest, some would become trapped in eddies behind a curve. The ridge would change a little, but not lose itself. It would remain ERG Chebbi, simply more current than before. We walk slowly enough that the landscape never blurs. A moonlit ripple, a slight hollow, a narrow line of darker grains. Each one arrives, stays with us, and passes behind. The pace matters. To understand dunes, you have to let small forms be enough, because the large forms are made from them. And as the ridge bends again, we descend into a trough where the sand lies flatter, and the story shifts toward the hidden firmness beneath the Dune Sea. The surface here feels different almost at once. It is still sandy, but less deep, as though a firmer layer rests not far below. ERG Chebbi's dunes rise above a ground that existed before the present sand covered it. In places, the Dune Sea is thick and soft. In others, the underlying surface comes closer, shaping how sand accumulates and how your steps land. Beneath active dunes, there may be older sediments, compacted surfaces, clay-rich layers, gravel beds, or former interdune deposits. These layers influence drainage, moisture retention, and the way dunes anchor or migrate. You cannot see them directly tonight, but you can sense their presence where the sand becomes shallower, where plants appear, or where a trough remains broad and firm. Interdune areas are important parts of an erg. They are the low spaces between dunes, sometimes dry and sandy, sometimes firmer, sometimes affected by occasional moisture. In some deserts, interdune flats can preserve traces of ancient surfaces while dunes migrate around them. They may collect fine sediment or salts when water briefly gathers. They are not gaps in the Dune Sea. They are its breathing spaces. You stand in one now, with slopes rising on either side. The air is cooler and more settled. The ground holds your weight with less sinking, and the sound of your step is slightly denser. If rain had passed recently, this low space might show darker patches, crusted textures, or shallow marks from water. Tonight, it is dry, quiet, and pale under the moon. The relationship between dune and interdune is slow and shifting. A migrating dune can cover a flat. A flat can reappear as sand moves onward. If climate becomes wetter or vegetation steadier, dunes may stabilize and interdune surfaces may expand. If conditions become drier or sand supply increases, active dunes may cover more ground. ERG Chebbi holds these possibilities in balance. The hidden firmness also changes how roots behave. Plants near interdune areas may reach into more stable layers, where moisture lingers a little longer after rare rain. Their presence can create small anchor points, breaking the smoothness of wind flow. Once again, life alters sand, and sand alters life. Nothing is separate in a quiet ecosystem. We cross the flat with careful steps. The stars above seem sharp in the dry air. The dunes on both sides are dark and patient. You can feel that the Dune Sea has both depth and foundation, softness and support. It is not simply loose sand piled at random. It is a landscape arranged over older ground, shaped from above by wind and from below by place. And as the interdune flat narrows, the next slope rises before us, with ripples running upward like fine lines of sleep. The climb begins in a soft fan of sand. Your feet sink more deeply again, and the body slows without being told. ERG Chebbi invites a pace that matches its own formation, unhurried, repetitive, and quiet. Each step climbs only a little. Each breath enters and leaves with the cool night air. The slope feels steep enough to notice, but never urgent, only patient. On this face, ripples are arranged diagonally, suggesting a wind that crossed the slope rather than meeting it directly. Oblique winds can move sand along a dune, as well as over it. They may stretch ridges, shift crests sideways, and create complex patterns on the surface. When you see ripples at an angle, you are seeing wind choose a path that is not simply up or down. Sand transport has direction, but not always a simple one. A grain may hop forward, strike another, roll sideways, and settle in a lee pocket. Over many motions, the average transport can be measured, but the individual path remains irregular. You can imagine the grains making small decisions without decision, each one responding to contact, slope, and airflow. Drift is orderly without being stiff. Halfway up, the sand becomes looser. It slides back a little under your feet, asking you to slow further. The surface is cool now, and when your hand touches it for balance, the grains cling briefly to your skin before falling away. The darkness around us makes the tactile world stronger. You feel texture, slope, and softness more clearly than you did in daylight. At the crest, the breeze returns just enough to move the finest grains. They travel close to the surface, a thin silver veil in moonlight. You may see them only when they cross a pale patch, then lose them against shadow. They are not many, but they show that the threshold has been reached in tiny places. The dune is beginning to stir. Wind thresholds vary with grain size, surface moisture, crusting, and vegetation. A dry, loose surface moves more easily than a damp or crusted one. Larger grains need stronger wind than fine sand, but very fine dust may behave differently, rising into suspension. This is why dunes can appear still in one patch and active in another. The surface is full of small conditions. We stand near the crest and watch the faint movement pass. It does not change the dune visibly. It simply reminds us that drift often begins before the eye can follow it. A landscape can be in motion below the threshold of attention. That thought is restful, because it means change does not need to announce itself to be real. And as the faint veil of sand slips over the crest, we follow it down the other side, where the lee face receives what the night wind can carry. The lee face glows dimly below us, smooth and cool. A few grains cross the crest and fall into the sheltered air, losing speed almost at once. ERG Chebbi's dune forms are made by this repeated handoff, from exposed side to sheltered side, from transport to rest. You can feel the change as soon as we step over, the wind easing around your body, the air becoming still. The upper lee slope is the most sensitive place. It waits just below the crest, where deposited grains can accumulate until they oversteepen the surface. Tonight the movement is slight, not enough to release a sheet, but you can see where past flows began, faint scalloped marks near the top. Those marks curve downward, then blend into the smoother lower face. The sand here is very fine underfoot. It gives way in shallow slides with each step. You can hear it moving around your ankles, a soft descending hush that stops almost immediately after you do. The surface is so responsive that your presence becomes visible at once, but your marks will not remain forever. Wind will soften them, and later drift will erase them entirely. There is comfort in that erasure. The dune does not reject the footprint. It receives it, holds it briefly, then folds it back into the larger pattern. ERG Chebbi is full of such temporary records. Tracks, ripples, slides, and wind streaks appear and vanish. The landscape remains itself by allowing its details to change. The lee side may also preserve different moisture conditions than the exposed face. Shade lasts longer here after sunrise, and wind may be weaker. In some hollows, dew might linger a little longer in the morning. These tiny differences can matter to insects, seeds, and surface crusts. The dune's shape creates microclimates, small worlds tucked into the larger dryness. You can imagine dawn here before it comes. The first light would touch the crest, while the lee slope stayed cool and blue. A beetle track might cross the shaded face. A plant at the base might hold a bead of moisture for a short time. Then the sun would lower its warmth onto the slope, and the surface would begin another day of drying, loosening, and waiting for wind. For now, the night holds everything in softness. The sand is cool, the sky is clear, and the dune face receives the few grains the breeze has carried. You can descend without hurry, letting each step become part of the slope's sound. Downward movement feels natural here, like settling deeper into a blanket of mineral quiet. And as we reach the shadow at the base, the dune above us becomes a dark wall of softness, and the stars appear to rest on its crest. At the bottom, the air is noticeably cooler. It has pooled between dunes, dense and still, with a faint mineral scent rising from the sand. ERG Chebbi's troughs can feel like rooms after dark, enclosed not by walls of stone, but by slopes that soften every edge. You stand inside one now, and the outside world feels farther away. Cold air drainage is a gentle part of desert nights. As sand and stone lose heat to the open sky, the air touching them cools too. Cooler air becomes denser and may slide down slope into low places. The effect can be subtle, but your skin understands it. The trough feels cooler than the crest, calmer than the exposed ridge, and more sheltered from the breeze. This pooling of cool air affects life and surface conditions. Dew, where it forms, may favor certain low areas. Temperature-sensitive animals may choose hollows or slopes according to the hour. Plants may benefit from slight differences in moisture and shelter near dune bases. Even in a landscape that seems simple from afar, the night divides it into many small climates. You breathe in, and the air is dry enough to feel clean. It carries no heavy scent, only a faint trace of dust, stone, and cooling sand. The silence here seems deeper because the slope absorbs sound. If you speak softly, your voice would not travel far. The dune takes the edges from it. It returns you to hush. The trough floor shows overlapping histories. Some areas are rippled by wind. Some are smoothed by foot traffic or animal movement. Some may be slightly firmer from past moisture. Where sand has collected from the slopes above, low fans spread out like pale shadows. These fans may be lifted again by future winds, sending grains onward through the ERG's quiet circulation. We sit for a moment with the dune rising above us. The crest is a narrow, dark line against a sky full of distance. It's peaceful to be small here. The dune is not aware of us, and that indifference feels gentle rather than lonely. It means the landscape doesn't require anything from you. It continues its slow work while you rest inside it. Time feels different at the base of a dune. Minutes pass with almost no event, and yet everything is not the same. The air cools, a grain settles, a faint breeze touches the crest and fades. Your breathing slows. The world becomes less crowded inside the mind. ERG Chebbi offers a spacious kind of stillness, And as we leave this cool hollow, we follow a shallow line of darker sand that curves toward another ridge, where heavier grains have paused. The darker line is subtle, like a shadow that remains even when the moonlight changes. You see it best when you stand at an angle. ERG Chebbi's sand is not perfectly uniform, and wind can sort its grains into fine bands. Heavier minerals, slightly coarser particles, or differently colored grains may gather along ripple troughs and small drainage paths, making the surface look written. This sorting happens because moving air has limits. It can carry or roll some grains more easily than others. Lighter grains may travel farther, while heavier ones lag behind. Repeated movement concentrates certain particles in thin streaks. The effect can be delicate, almost decorative, but it reflects the same physical sorting that shapes the larger dune field. You crouch near the line, and the sand feels a little different under your fingertips. Perhaps it is slightly coarser. Perhaps the darker grains warm more quickly by day and cool differently at night. Small color differences can alter temperature at the surface, which may influence tiny currents of air and the comfort of small organisms. Even color is not merely color here. It is part of the system. These dark streaks can shift with every wind. A strong gust may scatter them. A gentler wind may refine them. Footsteps can mix them back into the pale grains. Later, another sorting can begin. The surface of ERG Chebbi is always making and unmaking its fine patterns, like a slow hand smoothing and redrawing lines in sleep. The presence of heavier minerals also reminds us of rock origins. Not all grains come from the same source or weather in the same way. Some minerals resist breakdown, others alter, stain, or disappear. By the time they gather in the Dune Sea, they carry a quiet mineral history from uplands, river deposits, plains, and older sediments. The dune is a meeting place for fragments. We follow the dark line as it curves toward the ridge. It leads us not like a path made by intention, but like a trace made by process. You can let your attention rest on it without needing to know everything it contains. The line is enough. It shows that wind sorts gently and that even the surface has layers of meaning. Nearby, a few small pebbles sit on firmer ground, each with a tiny tail of sand on its sheltered side. These tails point in the direction of recent wind. They are little wind veins made from sediment. You might pass them without noticing in daylight, but in moonlight, their shadows make them clear. The desert's smallest instruments are often plain, and as the line fades into looser sand, we climb again, and the dune's surface becomes a field of ripples crossing one another in quiet, angled patterns. The crossed ripples make the slope feel richly textured. One set runs upward at a slant, while another, fainter set lies beneath it. ERG Chebbi carries these superimposed patterns wherever the wind has changed direction. You can see time in the crossing lines, because one breeze made the older pattern and another arrived later to lay a new surface over it. When wind shifts, it doesn't erase the past at once. It modifies it. New ripples may form on older ones. Crests may become rounded, then sharpened in another orientation. Sand may move diagonally across a slope, while the larger dune continues migrating in a different overall direction. The result is a layered surface, full of quiet disagreement that has settled into beauty. Your footstep presses several ripple crests at once. The sand collapses softly and leaves a broad mark. Around it, the pattern remains. This contrast between disturbance and order is soothing. You can touch the landscape, but you don't undo it. The scale of ERG Chebbi is too patient for a single step to matter much, and yet the surface receives that step completely. The science of cross ripples can be described in terms of flow direction, grain transport, and bed form adjustment. But to the sleepy mind, it may be enough to understand that wind has returned from more than one side. The dune remembers those returns in angled lines. Each line is a small rest after motion, a place where grains stopped together for a while. We pause halfway up the slope, and the night air brushes past from our left. It is not strong, but it has direction. You can feel it at your ear, then across your cheek. A few grains move in its path. They do not lift high. They only creep and hop, tapping faintly against the ripple crests. The sound is barely there. This is a good place to notice scale again. The entire dune may take years to shift perceptibly across the land, while a ripple can move in a single windy hour. A surface pattern can be erased before noon, while the ridge beneath it remains. The Dune Sea contains fast small changes and slow large ones, nested together without conflict. The crossed ripples climb with us until the crest grows near. The top is blurred by loose sand, and the leeward side beyond it is hidden in darkness. You can feel the slight suspense of arrival, but it's not sharp. It's only the body recognizing an edge, the place where one face of the dune becomes another, and where drift passes from lift into fall. And as we step over the crest, the far side opens into a wide moonlit bowl, and ERG Chebbi feels deeper than it did before. The bowl below is smooth and pale, held between several ridges. It looks almost like a dry basin within the Dune Sea, a place where sand has gathered from different directions and come to rest. The moonlight lies evenly across it, and the shadows at the edges are soft. You can stand at the rim and feel the space widen in front of you with calm. Such hollows can form where dune arms enclose an interdune area, or where complex ridges create shelter. They may shift as dunes migrate, changing shape over time. Some may be swept by wind, others may trap finer sand. In larger dune systems, enclosed or semi-enclosed lows can hold traces of past moisture, salts or fine sediments. Here the bowl feels dry and quiet beneath the night. We descend into it slowly. The slope is gentle at first, then loose near the middle. Sand slides around your feet, but the movement is small and soft. The air at the bottom is cooler again, and the surface feels almost level. The surrounding ridges block part of the horizon, making the sky above seem like a round, dark opening. A place like this shows how dunes create their own interiors. From outside, ERG Chebbi may seem like a series of ridges. From within, it becomes a sequence of rooms, corridors, hollows, ramps, and sheltered bowls. Each one has a different air, a different sound, and a different texture underfoot. The Dune Sea is not only seen, it is entered. The bowl floor has finer ripples near the center and smoother sand near the edges. Perhaps wind eddies have worked here, circling gently when air spills over the ridges. Perhaps grains have fallen from several slopes and been reworked on the floor. The exact details may change from season to season, but the principle remains. Shape creates airflow, and airflow reshapes the sand. You sit near the center, and for a little while the dunes surround you like a quiet amphitheater. No stage, no performance, only sand holding the night. The surface under your hands is cool and dry. The shadows around the bowl seem blue, though color is almost gone. Above, the stars are clear enough to feel close and remote at the same time. In a place like this, the mind can release its need for edges. The world becomes slope, hollow sky, and breath. ERG Chebbi's making continues around you, but not in a way that asks you to follow every detail. It is enough to know that wind has gathered this bowl, that sand has settled here, and that for now it holds peace. And as we rise from the bowl's center, we follow the gentlest ramp upward, where the sand has been packed by wind into a smooth incline. The ramp feels firmer than the sheltered slope before it. Your steps leave shallower marks. The surface has been swept and pressed by wind moving up and across it. ERG Chebbi offers this contrast again and again, loose descent and firmer ascent, soft hollow and exposed ramp. Your body begins to learn the rhythm without words, as if the dune is teaching through touch. On windward ramps, sand is often delivered upward toward the crest. Grains hop along the surface, losing and gaining energy with each collision. Some roll in short bursts, some settle into ripples. The slope remains comparatively gentle because incoming sand is spread across it. It is a place of approach, not release, and its shape reflects that steady reception. The airflow over a dune accelerates as it climbs the windward face, then separates or weakens beyond the crest. This pattern helps explain why sand erodes or moves on one side and deposits on the other. You can picture the air as a transparent sheet sliding over the dune, clinging to the exposed slope, then losing contact in the sheltered lee. The invisible becomes visible through sand. As we climb, the breeze presses lightly against us. It's still weak, but here on the windward side it feels clearer. A few grains skitter past your shoes. They travel in small hops, never far from the ground. You might see a tiny sparkle as one catches moonlight, then disappears. The movement is modest, but it belongs to the same process that has raised every ridge around us. Windward faces often look smoother from afar, yet up close they are full of microforms. Ripples, grain shadows, impact marks, and slight color variations all show what the air has done. The surface is not a blank ramp, it is a record of recent flow. You can read it slowly, line by line, while the night remains still enough to let your attention soften. Near the top, the incline lessens. The crest ahead is rounded rather than sharp, perhaps softened by changing winds or by a recent calm interval. Not every crest cuts cleanly against the sky. Some are blurred, braided, or lowered by crosswinds. ERG Chebbi's shapes are varied because the winds that make them have histories of their own. We reach the rounded crest and stand where the air can touch both sides again. The temperature feels slightly different here, less pooled and more open. Your breathing is quiet. The sand underfoot is cool, and the sky is wide. The dune seems to hold you between two directions of drift. And as we follow this rounded crest, the night's stillness begins to feel older, and the Dune Sea opens into thoughts of climate, time, and change. Dunes respond to climate, though they do so in their own slow language. ERG Chebbi's activity depends on dryness, vegetation, wind strength, and sand supply. If conditions shift, the dune field can change its pace. More moisture may encourage plants and crusts that stabilize sand. Drier or windier intervals may allow more grains to move. The Dune Sea is a climate record written in motion. Across deserts, dune fields can become active, stabilize, reactivate, or reorganize over long periods. Some ancient dunes become fixed by vegetation or cemented into rock. Others remain mobile where conditions favor drift. ERG Chebbi, with its active sand and high ridges, shows a present balance in which wind still has enough freedom to shape the surface. You can imagine wetter times, when plants held more of the ground and sand moved less often. You can imagine drier intervals, when exposed surfaces gave more grains to the wind. The dune field would not need to vanish or appear all at once. It could breathe larger or smaller across time, expanding, pausing, and changing its internal forms as conditions allowed. This long perspective is calming because it stretches the mind beyond today. The concerns that felt sharp at the surface of your life become smaller beside a landscape shaped by seasons, centuries, and older cycles. The dunes do not hurry through their changes. They do not resist them either. They receive climate as a slow hand, and they answer with shape. The evidence for past change can be subtle. Stabilized surfaces, buried soils, older dune layers, and shifts in grain composition may all suggest different conditions. Scientists use careful methods to understand these histories, including the timing of when grains last saw sunlight before burial. But tonight, we keep the idea soft. Sand remembers light, and that memory can be read. There is something beautiful in that. A grain buried inside a dune has been hidden from the sun. When researchers study such grains, they can estimate when that burial happened. The dune becomes a keeper of intervals, a place where exposure and darkness alternate. In a sleep script, that thought feels especially gentle. Even grains have their seasons of light and rest. We continue along the crest, letting the idea settle without becoming heavy. The sky above us is full of ancient light. The sand beneath us holds its own quieter histories of exposure, burial, and return. ERG Chebbi stands between sky time and ground time, between the stars overhead and the grains underfoot. And as the crest lowers into another saddle, we move with it, entering a softer passage where the dunes seem to fold inward. The saddle is a low place between higher crests, smooth and easy to cross. The sand here is wind-brushed, with ripples flowing through like pale threads. ERG Chebbi saddles guide movement for people, animals, and air alike. You naturally choose the gentler crossing, and the wind does much the same, slipping through lower places with less effort and leaving its mark. In a saddle, airflow can be focused. It may move more quickly than in a wide hollow, but more gently than across an exposed crest. The surface often shows this balance. Ripples may be sharp, but not deeply scoured. Sand may pass through, rather than pile high. A saddle is a place of transition, where one dune body leans toward another and the wind finds a passage. Your steps follow the same shallow line the air might take. The sand is cool and supportive. The slope on either side rises only a little, making the space feel open and sheltered at once. This is one of the quieter pleasures of dune walking, the way each form leads you naturally into the next without requiring a path. The saddle also reveals how dunes merge. Two ridges may grow toward one another, overlap, or share sand through connecting low areas. A smaller dune can climb the flank of a larger one. A crest can split or join depending on wind and supply. The Dune Sea is not made of separate objects laid side by side. It is a continuous fabric of forms. Fabric is a useful word here, because the sand seems woven by direction. One wind lays a set of lines, another crosses them. Gravity draws grains down. Vegetation pins small patches. Moisture stiffens them briefly. Heat loosens them again. The resulting surface is not random, but it is never rigid. It has the flexible order of cloth moving in a slow current. We stop in the saddle and look back. The ridge behind us has already changed in perspective. What seemed high from below now looks like a soft shoulder under the sky. What seemed like a single slope is now a series of overlapping plains. Dunes are like that. They are always partly revealed by where you stand. And as we pass beyond the saddle, the sand begins to fall away in long, smooth lines, and the Dune Sea opens into another sheltered descent. The descent is broad and calm. There is no sharp drop, only a steady lowering into shadow. Your feet slide a little with each step, and the sand murmurs around them. ERG Chebbi feels especially quiet here, as though the surrounding ridges have gathered the night and held it close. The moon is lower now, and the shadows have become deeper and more blue. On wide lee slopes, sand can move in sheets or in smaller tongues, depending on how it crosses the crest. If supply is even, the face may look smooth and uniform. If the wind arrives at angles or in pulses, patterns can become more complex. You can see faint streaks descending the slope, some straight, some branching, each one marking a previous path of falling grains. Gravity is the quieter partner of wind. Wind lifts and carries sand toward the crest. Gravity finishes the movement down the sheltered side. Without gravity, dunes would not have slip faces. Without wind, those faces would not be renewed. Together, they create the asymmetry that gives many dunes their recognizable form. One side approaches, one side receives. The whole form travels. We descend within that partnership. Your body leans slightly into the slope. The sand supports you, then flows just enough to ease each step. There is a gentle trust in the movement. You do not need to control every grain underfoot. The slope already knows how to settle. It has done this through countless small slides before us. At the bottom, the sand fans outward again. Fine grains collect in a low, smooth apron. The boundary between slope and floor is not a line, but a curve. This rounding happens because falling sand spreads as it reaches gentler ground, and later winds soften the transition further. The dune's shape is always being edited toward continuity. The night remains very still. If there are animals moving nearby, they do so quietly. A track may appear in the morning that we cannot see now. A beetle may cross behind us. A small burrow may hold warmth from the day. The Dune Sea supports life without showing much of it at once. Its ecosystem is discreet, timed to cool hours and hidden places. We settle briefly at the lower apron, and the sand has the faintest chill. Your hands rest on the surface. Your breathing is slow. The slope above us is dark, and the crest is pale. This is the heart of the sleep feeling in ERG Chebbi, the sensation of being held between movement and rest, with nothing urgent left to answer. And as the trough carries us onward, the Dune Sea widens again, and the next ridge waits like a long, quiet wave under the stars. We follow the trough toward that long, quiet wave, and the sand ahead seems to rise without beginning. The slope is first only a pale lift in the darkness. Then ERG Chebbi gathers height again, ridge by ridge, with moonlight resting on the upper surface and shadow folded below. You can feel the Dune Sea drawing us forward with patience. The trough floor is lightly rippled, but the ripples are softer here, as though the wind that made them had been losing strength. Your feet cross them gently. Some crests break under your weight, and some remain beside your step, undisturbed. The air is still cool, and the scent of sand is faint, clean, and dry enough to make every breath feel simple. When wind weakens, it leaves behind the forms it was last strong enough to make. A powerful wind can move more grains, smooth some smaller features, and rebuild larger slopes. A gentler wind can refine the surface into delicate ripples. A dying wind may carry only the lightest particles before it rests. In this way, the surface of ERG Chebbi preserves the ending of weather as much as its strength. You can imagine a windy afternoon fading into evening. At first, grains stream over the surface in a low veil. Then the flow thins. Ripples sharpen as fewer grains cross them. A final few particles tap along the ground, and after that, stillness. The dune is left wearing the last pattern the air could draw before it quieted. This is one reason a dune surface feels so intimate at night. It is not simply old, it is recent. The ridge may be part of a long landscape history, but the ripple near your hand may belong to yesterday's wind or this evening's breeze. Time is layered close together here. Ancient process and fresh detail meet at your fingertips. We step onto the lower slope of the next ridge. The sand yields a little, then firms. Above us the crest is broad and low, without a sharp edge. ERG Chebbi often shifts between crispness and softness this way, depending on recent winds, moisture, and disturbance. A dune can look newly combed in one place and gently blurred in another, all within the same body. And as we climb this broad, low ridge, the story of drift becomes slower and wider, reaching beyond the dune to the weather that passes over the Sahara. The air moving across ERG Chebbi is part of a much larger breathing. It may be shaped by regional pressure patterns, seasonal temperature contrasts, and the open reach of dry land. We feel only a light breeze tonight, but the Dune Sea has known many kinds of wind. Some are steady and patient. Some come in pulses. Some shift with the season. Seasonal winds matter because they repeat. A single gust may leave a small mark. A recurring wind can organize an entire slope. Over months and years, repeated directions become ridges, slip faces, and migration paths. When a second seasonal direction adds its own work, the dune field becomes more complex. ERG Chebbi's forms hold these recurring touches in their curves. You can think of wind direction as a kind of handwriting. One hand writes from one side, laying ripples and building crests. Another hand comes later, crossing the first lines or softening them. The page is never wiped completely clean before the next inscription begins. Sand accepts revision. That is why the Dune Sea feels layered rather than simple. The wind also changes with height above the surface. Near the ground, friction slows it. Above the rippled skin, it moves more freely. Around dune crests, it can accelerate, separate, swirl, and reattach. These details guide where grains are lifted or dropped. You don't need to see the air to understand its shape. The dune has made the invisible visible. We pause on the middle slope and feel the faint flow across our faces. It is cooler now than it would be by day. It carries no moisture you can notice, only a thin, dry touch. Sand does not move much at this speed, but your skin feels the direction clearly. The dune does too, through every loose grain resting on its surface. The broader Sahara is full of surfaces that answer wind differently. Stony pavements resist movement and let sand pass. Dry basins may supply finer sediment. Vegetated patches slow the air and trap grains. Rocky outcrops break flow and create wakes. ERG Chebbi exists within this larger textured world, receiving sand from some surfaces and returning it to others in long cycles. At the crest, the slope levels for a few steps. The sky above seems very deep. The dune behind us has become a low dark shape, and the one ahead descends into a long hollow. You can feel the night expanding on all sides, not empty, but full of slow air, cooled sand, and the quiet record of many winds. And as we cross the crest and descend toward the hollow, the ground begins to show how a dune sea stores movement even when it appears completely still. The hollow below is calm and pale, with a faint sheen where moonlight glances across smoother sand. ERG Chebbi often feels most motionless in places like this, yet the forms around us are stored movement. A slope stores the direction of past transport. A ripple stores the rhythm of near-surface flow. A curve stores the meeting of winds. Stillness here is movement that has settled. This stored movement can be read at many scales. At the smallest scale, individual grains have surfaces shaped by abrasion, with tiny pits, polish, or frost from repeated impacts. At the surface scale, ripples reveal recent airflow. At the dune scale, slip faces and crest orientation reveal longer transport patterns. At the ERG scale, the whole field shows where sand has been able to gather and remain. You pick up a little sand and let it rest in your palm. It does not seem active now. It is cool, loose, and almost weightless by the handful. But each grain has moved many times, possibly through water, wind, slope, and burial. It has struck other grains. It has rested in darkness. It has returned to light. Your hand holds a small archive of motion. The word archive may sound formal, but in the night it becomes gentle. The sand does not preserve history as a book does. It preserves it in form, texture, layering, and position. If buried deeply, some layers may remain hidden for long periods. If exposed again, they may be reworked. The record is partial, changing, and alive to the next wind. We walk across the hollow, and the surface grows slightly firmer underfoot. Perhaps the sand is thinner here. Perhaps a past moisture event packed it more tightly. The sound of your step changes subtly, from soft hush to a denser crunch, then back again. These small differences keep you connected to the ground without waking the mind too sharply. The hollow's edges show faint aprons from surrounding slopes. Each apron is a place where falling sand met flatter ground and spread. Later winds have touched them, adding ripples and smoothing their margins. You can see how the hollow receives from all sides, then gives back when air begins moving through it. It is both basin and corridor, both rest and passage. This balance is one of the reasons ERG Chebbi feels so peaceful. Nothing here is only one thing. A crest is an edge and a pathway. A trough is a shelter and a wind channel. A plant is a living thing and a sand trap. A grain is small, but in countless company, it becomes a dune. The mind can loosen into that, and as the hollow narrows ahead, a low line of vegetation appears near the margin, where sand and root hold each other lightly. The plants are sparse, but they change the feeling of the ground. Their dark forms rise from small mounds, and the sand around them is gathered, roughened, and patterned. ERG Chebbi's margins and lower interdune spaces often hold these quiet anchors. You can smell a faint dryness from stems and dust. Not green exactly, but earthy, sun-cured, and restrained. A plant in a dune field is a small engineer. Its stems slow the wind near the surface. Its roots hold grains in place. Its shade changes temperature by a little. Organic matter may collect around it, and insects may use it as shelter. Over time, sand can mound at its base, creating what is sometimes called a nebka, a plant-anchored dune. You can see how this happens without needing to measure it. Wind carries sand toward the plant. Air slows among the stems. Grains drop. More grains arrive. The mound rises, and the plant may continue growing through it if conditions allow. The Dune Sea, often imagined as bare, becomes a place where life quietly participates in the shaping of land. These mounds may remain low near the active dune field or become more prominent in steadier areas. If the plant dies, the mound can erode, releasing sand again. If vegetation expands, it can stabilize more surface. If sand movement increases, it can bury or reshape the mound. The relationship is dynamic, but not hurried. It unfolds through seasons. You touch the sand near one plant, careful and light. It feels firmer where roots and fine debris have held it. A little farther away, loose grains return. The difference is immediate. The plant has changed the ground within the reach of its body. In the large Dune Sea, this is a tiny island. To a beetle, a seed, or a drifting grain, it may be a whole landscape. Life here often avoids excess. Leaves may be small, sparse or tough. Growth may wait for rare moisture. Roots may do more than branches show. The surface life of a desert is often modest, because so much effort is hidden below. You can feel a kinship in that hiddenness, in the idea that strength can be quiet and unseen. We move past the low vegetation and return toward more open sand. Behind us, the mounds remain as soft silhouettes. Ahead, the dunes rise again without interruption. The plants do not break the story of drift, they deepen it. They show that even in a moving landscape, some things pause the wind long enough for shelter to form. And as the vegetation thins, the sand becomes cleaner and looser, and the Dune Sea returns us to the simple exchange between air and grain. Open sand has a different sound. It whispers underfoot with less crackle, less root firmness, more immediate flow. ERG Chebbi's active surfaces feel almost fluid in the dark, not because they move all at once, but because they are so ready to respond. Your step presses down, grains shift aside, and the surface accepts a new shape with ease. Active sand is often brighter and less mixed with organic matter or fine crusts. It may be more easily sorted by wind, making clear ripples and smooth slip faces. Without plants or stones to slow the air, transport can become more continuous across exposed slopes. The dune's form then reflects flow more directly, as if wind and grain are in closer conversation. You can imagine a clear windy morning here. The sun warms the surface. The air near the ground begins to move with more energy. Once the threshold is crossed, grains start hopping. First a few, then many. The surface becomes a low stream of sand, never rising high, but spreading across the slope like a moving veil. That veil feeds the crest. At the crest, deposition begins where the air can no longer carry all it has lifted. Sand gathers. The lip grows. The sheltered face waits below. When the build-up becomes too steep, a sheet releases and slides downward. This cycle may happen again and again during a windy period, each event small, each one moving the dune a little farther. The motion is not always visible from far away. A dune can migrate slowly enough that its daily changes vanish into sameness. But over time, comparison reveals movement. A crest shifts, a slope covers old ground, a trough opens where another once lay. The dune field lives in a timescale just beyond ordinary attention, which is why walking through it feels timeless. Your own movement is slower now. The sand asks for more effort with every step, but the effort is gentle and repetitive. Sink, lift, breathe. The dark slope rises. The stars remain. The body begins to match the dune's patience, and thought becomes less sharp. You are not studying from outside the landscape. You are moving within its rhythm. We pause on a smooth face and look across the open sand. No sharp edge interrupts the view. The surface seems to pour upward into the sky. In the moonlight, ERG Chebbi's color has almost disappeared, leaving only tone, curve, and softness. A ridge may look close until you begin walking toward it. A hollow may hide another slope beyond it. ERG Chebbi folds space gently, so that the landscape reveals itself one rise at a time. You learn not to measure too quickly. You let each crest arrive when it arrives, in its own time. This folded distance comes from repetition without exact sameness. Similar shapes recur, but each one differs slightly in height, slope, texture, and relation to the wind. The eye recognizes the pattern, then loses certainty in the variation. That uncertainty is not unsettling tonight. It helps the mind soften. The dunes give you enough familiarity to rest, and enough difference to keep a quiet wonder alive. In geomorphic terms, dune spacing and height reflect sand supply, wind strength, surface conditions, and interactions among neighboring dunes. Larger dunes can influence airflow over longer distances. Smaller dunes may form in the wake or on the flanks of larger ones. The pattern that results is self-organized, not placed by hand, yet arranged by repeated physical rules. Self-organization is a lovely idea in a place like this. No single grain understands the dune. No single breeze designs the field. But interactions accumulate. Grains collide. Slopes adjust. Air accelerates and slows. Obstacles trap sand. The result is order, rising naturally from countless small relations. ERG Chebbi's beauty is not imposed. It emerges. You can feel emergence under your feet. The slope is just sand, but it behaves as a slope. The crest is just grains, but it acts as an edge. The dune is just loose material, but it travels like a body. The ERG is just many dunes, but it becomes a landscape with moods, passages, rooms, and horizons. The night makes this more pronounced. Without daytime detail, the large forms become primary. You feel the rhythm of rise and fall. You sense the way one ridge leads into another. You lose the urge to separate everything. ERG Chebbi becomes one continuous slow surface, and you move across it like a thought drifting toward sleep. We descend into another trough, and the distance closes again. The surrounding slopes gather near. The horizon narrows. Your breath sounds a little louder in the sheltered air. The Dune Sea has made a small room from open land, and we enter it without needing to name it. And as this room of sand darkens around us, the surface begins to show traces of the night's smallest travelers. A thin line crosses the trough from one slope to another. It's not made by wind. It's too irregular, too purposeful. You bend closer and see the paired marks of tiny feet, with a slight drag between them. ERG Chebbi is active even when the sand seems empty, and these small tracks remind you that life moves through the dunes in quiet hours. Tracks are brief records. They show direction, gait, and surface condition. On a cool night, they may remain until wind erases them. On a windy morning, they may vanish within minutes. A trackway can cross a ripple field, climb a slope, disappear at a firmer patch, and resume beyond it. Following one is like reading a sentence that the dune will soon let go. Nocturnal animals use the Dune Sea with care. Beetles, small reptiles, rodents, and other desert-adapted creatures may move when temperatures are lower and surfaces are easier to cross. Some avoid the loosest slopes. Some use vegetation patches. Some leave trails that show pauses, turns, and little searches across the sand. Their lives are woven into the surface. The science of desert adaptation can be very precise, involving water balance, burrowing behavior, timing, and heat exchange. But as we stand here, it feels simpler and more intimate. A small body waits out the day. Night cools the sand. The creature emerges, crosses a dune, finds food or shelter, and leaves a line that moonlight briefly preserves. You can feel how gentle that is. No dramatic struggle, only the quiet practice of belonging to a dry place. The dune doesn't protect or oppose these lives in any personal way. It offers shade, softness, exposure, and concealment in changing combinations. The creatures know these combinations through bodies shaped by long experience. A beetle track may look like a string of tiny beads. A lizard trail may show a delicate curve. A small mammal's prints may appear in pairs, then vanish near a plant mound. Each mark is a soft interruption in the wind's pattern. The dune accepts it, holds it, and later smooths it back into sand. We follow the track for a few steps, then let it go. It turns toward a darker patch near the base of a shrub, where the sand is firmer and shadowed. There is no need to disturb it. The small traveler has already passed. We remain in the trough, listening to the silence around the record it left. And as we leave the track behind, the trough rises gently, and the dunes ahead begin to gather the first faint suggestion of pre-dawn cool. The night is still deep, but something in the air has changed. It feels clearer, thinner, and more settled, as though the desert has reached its coolest breath. ERG Chebbi rests under this late-night stillness, its ridges dark and pale in alternating bands. You may feel the chill more now on your hands and face, a soft cooling that belongs to the hours before light. Desert surfaces often reach their lowest temperatures before dawn. With clear skies, heat radiates away through the night. Sand, especially near the surface, loses warmth quickly. Low areas collect cooler air. Exposed crests may feel slightly more open to any breeze. This creates a quiet thermal landscape, a pattern of warmth and coolness laid across the dunes. Your body reads that pattern without needing instruments. The trough is colder. The slope is a little less still. A sheltered patch near vegetation feels different from open sand. The ground under your palm is cool enough to wake the skin, but not sharply. It is the kind of cool that invites blankets, slow breathing, and deeper rest. Moisture may sometimes appear in such hours as dew, depending on the air. In a dry desert, dew can be slight, but even slight moisture can matter. A thin film between grains increases cohesion. It can make the surface firmer until the sun dries it. It can help small organisms or seeds in modest ways. In the Dune Sea, tiny amounts can have meaning. Tonight, we only imagine it as a possibility. The sand feels dry at the surface, but the air carries that pre-dawn clarity. If dew formed in a sheltered low, it would not announce itself loudly. It might darken the sand slightly, bind a ripple crest, or collect on a plant stem. Then morning would take it back, and the wind would meet the loosened surface later. This daily cycle of cooling, moisture, warming, and drying repeats quietly. It influences when grains move, when animals emerge, when plants receive small relief, and when surfaces crust or loosen. ERG Chebbi's large dunes rise from wind, but their immediate texture is shaped also by these daily exchanges between heat, air, and ground. We climb the gentle rise toward another crest. The sand is cold enough now that the earlier warmth feels like a memory. The sky near the horizon remains dark, but less dense. You can sense morning far away, not here yet, only beginning somewhere beyond the dunes. And as we reach the crest in this cool hour, the Dune Sea lies around us like a vast sleeping form, and every ridge seems to hold its breath. From the crest, ERG Chebbi stretches in soft gradients of shadow. The high lines are pale, the troughs are blue-black. The far ridges blend into one another until distance becomes a haze of shape. You stand where the wind can pass, but it barely moves. The whole Dune Sea feels suspended in stillness. This is a moment when transport is minimal. The sand is cool. The air near the surface is calm. If a faint dew or crust has formed in places, it may further reduce movement. The ripples remain undisturbed. Tracks remain legible. Slip faces hold the marks of older slides. The landscape is ready for light, but not yet ready for the day's activity. You can think of it as a pause between two kinds of work. Night has cooled and settled the surface. Day will warm and loosen it. Wind, if it rises, will begin to lift grains again. Between these states, the Dune Sea rests with exceptional clarity. Forms made by yesterday's air wait for tomorrow's air, and nothing needs to happen quickly. The crest under your feet is narrow, but not sharp. You can sit with one foot on the windward side and one near the sheltered side, feeling the subtle difference in texture. The exposed side is firmer, the sheltered side softer. The distinction is simple, but it contains the whole logic of dune migration: approach on one side, release on the other, a long journey made from smallness. Far below, a trough curves away into darkness. It may channel wind later. It may hold cool air now. It may receive tracks before sunrise. Every feature has more than one role, depending on time of day and season. ERG Chebbi's forms are multifunctional in the quietest way, shifting their meaning as conditions change. We remain on the crest and let the stillness lengthen. The mind, half asleep, can rest in the repeated shapes: ridge, hollow, slope, crest. Not as a list, but as a slow undulation. The body feels how the dune rises and falls, and that rhythm becomes almost like breathing. And as the horizon lightens by the smallest degree, we descend toward the side where morning will first reveal the ripples. The first light is not yet color. It is a soft thinning of darkness along the eastern edge of the world. ERG Chebbi remains mostly moonlit, but the shadows begin to loosen. The slope below us shows more detail, ripple by ripple, as if the sand were slowly returning from a dream. You step carefully into that faint paleness. Pre-dawn light is kind to dunes. It doesn't flatten them the way overhead sun can. It grazes the surface, revealing texture through long shadows. A low ripple becomes visible. A shallow footprint gains form. A small slide scar appears near the crest. The Dune Sea becomes readable again, not all at once, but by degrees. The sand beneath your feet is still cool. It holds the night in its upper layer. When the sun rises, that will change quickly. But now every surface feels rested. You can brush your hand over a ripple crest and feel its fragile edge. The grains fall into the trough beside it, a tiny alteration in a field of thousands of lines. Light changes the color before it changes the warmth. The gray sand takes on a hint of rose, then honey, then pale gold. Iron-stained grains answer first, warming the slope visually even while the surface remains cool. Quartz grains glint faintly where angles are right. ERG Chebbi begins to look less like a night sea and more like a dune field again. Though still softened by dawn, morning also resets attention. Tracks that were nearly invisible in moonlight become clear. Dark mineral streaks sharpen. Plant mounds stand out. The windward face reveals its ripples in fine relief. The lee face shows smooth sheets from past slides. With each minute, the landscape offers more information, but it does so gently, without breaking the calm. You may notice your own footprints behind you now. They cross the slope in a curved line, already softened where sand slid back into them. They belong to the night journey, but they will not last long. The first active breeze may blur them. A later wind may remove them completely. That impermanence feels like permission. We continue downward as dawn grows slowly. The slope is broad, and the ripples lead us toward the trough below. Every line catches light from one side, shadow from the other. The dune's surface becomes a page again, and the morning begins to read it aloud in silence. And as we reach the lower ripples, the first warmth touches the upper crest, and ERG Chebbi begins another day of slow drift. The sun itself is still low, but its light has found the high ridges. The crests glow amber while the troughs remain cool and dim. You can feel the contrast through your skin before the air changes much. ERG Chebbi is waking from the top down, with light arriving first on the exposed edges and warmth following behind. As the surface warms, the air just above it begins to respond. Temperature differences can create small eddies and currents near the ground. Larger winds may develop later, depending on regional weather, but the local surface already participates in the day's beginning. Sand grains do not move simply because light touches them, yet warming can help dry and loosen the uppermost layer. If dew or slight moisture formed overnight, the morning sun will gradually remove it. A dampened crust may soften, crack, or dry into a surface ready for wind. Tracks may persist a little longer where moisture held them. Ripples may resist the first weak breeze, then yield as the sand loosens. The dune's readiness for drift is not a switch, but a slow transition. You kneel near a ripple field and see the tiny shadows changing as light strengthens. The crests look sharper now. Their windward sides are pale, and their lee sides remain shaded. Each ripple is a miniature lesson in transport, a small slope of approach and release. The same logic that shapes the high dunes repeats at the scale of your hand. The air smells slightly warmer already. Dust, minerals, and dry stems release a faint scent as light spreads. It is subtle, not lush, but it belongs to morning in an arid place. The coolness remains in the trough, while the upper slope begins to glow. You are between night and day, between rest and motion, between the settled surface and the next breeze. A few insects may return to shelter as the light grows. A track that looked fresh in the night now ends near a small hole or plant base. Life adjusts to the changing surface quickly. The Dune Sea's quiet ecosystem moves by timing, often using the cooler edges of day and night. Morning is not an awakening for everything. For some lives it is a return to hidden rest. We stand and move along the lower slope, letting the sun remain gentle and low. The dune above us is gaining color. The trough behind us is still blue. The difference creates a soft layered world, where every ridge has two moods at once. And as daylight spreads across the dune face, the shape of sand drift becomes clearer, and the long work of wind appears in every line. In fullening light, you can see how the windward slope rises gradually to the crest. The ripples climb in orderly bands, and their orientation hints at recent airflow. ERG Chebbi seems newly precise, though nothing about it has become rigid. The dune is still soft, still changeable, but morning gives its surfaces a gentle clarity. The crest itself is slightly sinuous. It curves left, then right, then lifts toward a higher point. This waviness may reflect variations in wind, sand supply, and the influence of neighboring dunes. No crest is perfectly uniform because air is never perfectly uniform near a complex surface. It accelerates in some places, slows in others, and deposits sand unevenly along the edge. Where more sand has gathered, the crest may be fuller. Where wind has scoured, it may be lower or sharper. Small notches can form. Little tongues of sand may spill over. Over time, these irregularities can move along the crest, merge, or fade. The dune is not a smooth mathematical curve, it is a living surface of adjustments. You follow the crest line with your eyes before you climb it. The light makes the lee side visible now, a steep smooth plane falling into shade. Near the top, a few small avalanching scars show where grains recently slipped. Lower down, the face has been softened by older ripples or footmarks. It is a record of gravity, wind, and passage written over one another. The process of dune migration can be imagined simply here. Sand climbs the gentle windward side by saltation and creep. It accumulates at the crest. It slips down the lee face when the slope oversteepens. Repeated many times, this transfers sand from upwind to downwind. The dune moves, though individual grains may cycle through many positions as it goes. We climb slowly beside that record. The sand warms under the first sunlight, but only at the surface. Beneath your step, coolness remains. Your shadow stretches long across the ripples, touching several small crests at once. The day has not become bright enough to wake the mind fully. It remains soft, low, and kind. From halfway up, you turn and see the trough behind us glowing now around its edges. The night's blue is thinning. The plant mounds stand clearer. Tracks are beginning to blur in the increasing light. Soon, the surface will be more exposed, more readable, and more active. But for now it lingers in the calm of transition, and as we climb into that calm, the dune's internal history seems to rise with us, hidden beneath every warm grain. Inside a dune, layers lie at angles, each one marking a former surface or slip event. You cannot see them from here, but you can imagine them beneath your feet. ERG Chebbi's dunes are not piles without structure. They are built from inclined sheets, wind-rippled surfaces, and buried slip faces, stacked and cut by later movement. If wind were to expose a section, or if a dune were eventually preserved in rock, those layers might become visible. Crossbeds would show the direction of former migration. Fine laminae would show individual avalanches or ripple migration. Erosion surfaces might mark pauses or changes in wind. The dune's soft body contains a hidden architecture made from repeated rest and release. The idea of hidden architecture is soothing here. From outside, the dune is smooth. Inside, it is ordered. Not rigidly, not perfectly, but with a quiet grain-by-grain structure. Many things are like that. A calm surface may hold many layers beneath it. A life may look simple from far away and contain years of small adjustments inside. The sand under your feet may one day move farther through the dune, or be buried, exposed, and moved again. It may not remain in this slope. The dune itself may shift across the ground, while its grains cycle through crest, face, base, and ramp. Nothing is fixed at the level of the individual grain, yet the overall form persists for a time. That persistence feels gentle. We reach the crest in warm light. The sun is low enough to make the ridge shine. The sheltered face below remains cool and shaded, a long, smooth descent into blue. Here, the contrast between sides is clear. Approach and shelter, warming and cooling, movement and rest, all held within one dune. The crest line is soft underfoot, and a few grains spill as you shift your weight. They slide down the lee side in a small fan, stopping quickly. You have added almost nothing to the dune's movement, yet the slope responds. The surface is sensitive, and that sensitivity is part of its beauty. Far across the Dune Sea, other crests are lighting one by one. ERG Chebbi seems to wake in ridges, not all at once. First the highest lines, then the shoulders, then the troughs. The whole field becomes a slow unfolding of gold, and as the morning light moves down the slopes, we descend again into shade, where the cool night still lingers in the sand. The shaded lee face holds the night longer than the crest. Your steps sink into cool grains, and the air feels slightly denser near the slope. ERG Chebbi's daily rhythm is written in these temperature contrasts, with sunlit faces warming quickly while shadowed hollows keep their quiet coolness for a little more time. On this side, the sand is softer and more yielding. The slope has received grains from above rather than being combed by direct wind. Each step starts a shallow slide that follows you down for a moment, then stops. The sound is like a hushed pour, dry and fine. In the growing light, you can watch the grains move around your feet. The shaded face may be less ready for transport until the sun reaches it. Moisture, if present, may linger longer. Surface crusts may remain firmer. Small animals may use these cooler zones briefly before retreating. The dune's orientation matters hour by hour, because light, heat, and wind meet each slope differently. A dune is a compass made of sand. You notice a line of tiny tracks crossing the lower shade. They look crisp, protected from the earliest light. The creature that made them is gone, but its path still holds. It crossed from one plant mound toward a firmer patch, perhaps using the lee slope because the sand was cooler or softer. The tracks are small, but they give the dune a lived-in feeling. At the base, the shade meets a brighter patch where sunlight has reached the trough floor. The boundary is gradual, a soft shift from blue-gray to amber. You step across it and feel little change at first, then a faint warmth on the top of your foot. The day enters the Dune Sea quietly. Through edges like this, we pause at the meeting of shade and light. The dune above us is half night, half morning. The surface beside your hand is cool in shadow and warmer inches away. ERG Chebbi is not one temperature, one texture, or one state. It is a mosaic of small conditions, each one changing with the sun. And as the sun rises higher, the wind remains gentle for now, and we move across the trough before the day fully opens. The trough floor brightens slowly. Ripples that were silver in moonlight are now pale gold, with thin brown shadows. Your footprints from earlier would be hard to find among the many textures, and soon they may be gone entirely. ERG Chebbi keeps returning its surface to the work of wind, light, and time. In the morning, the contrast between active sand and firmer interdune patches becomes easier to see. Loose surfaces glow cleanly and show crisp ripples. Firmer patches may appear darker, smoother, or slightly crusted. Around plants, the sand is rougher and more mixed. These subtle changes tell you where drift is free, where it slows, and where it has been interrupted. A small breeze crosses the trough. It is not strong enough to carry much, but it lifts a faint thread of dust from a dry patch and lays it down again. The air has a delicate texture now, neither night still nor day brisk. You can feel it on your cheeks, then on your hands, as if the landscape is deciding how much movement the morning will hold. Dust is part of the larger desert story, though it behaves differently from dune sand. Very fine particles can be lifted high into the atmosphere and carried far beyond the dunes. Sand grains, heavier and larger, usually remain close to the surface and build bedforms. Wind sorts these sizes continually. ERG Chebbi's dunes remain because sand-sized grains gather here, while finer dust may depart. That departure affects clarity. After dusty winds, the sky may soften or pale. After calmer periods, the horizon may sharpen. Dust can carry nutrients across regions, settle on distant land or water, and connect deserts to ecosystems far away. Even so, our focus stays here, on the heavier grains that hop, roll, and settle into the Dune Sea around us. You can feel the difference between dust and sand by touching the surface after a calm night. Fine dust may coat a firmer patch like powder. Loose sand feels granular and flowing. Gravel stays solid beneath it all. Each texture belongs to a different kind of motion. The desert is not one material, but a sorted spectrum. We continue across the trough, and the air warms almost imperceptibly. The cool held in the low place begins to thin. Above us, the sunlit crest glows brighter. The shadowed slope softens from blue into tan. Morning is arriving grain by grain, just as the dunes were built. And as the trough rises toward another open slope, the surface becomes drier and looser, ready to answer if the wind strengthens. The slope ahead faces the light, its uppermost grains are beginning to warm, and the ripples look crisp in the low sun. ERG Chebbi's morning surfaces often seem newly made, because every shadow is long enough to reveal texture. You can see individual ripple crests like fine threads, each one resting in a narrow line of brightness. As warming continues, any slight overnight binding can weaken. Moisture evaporates. Thin crusts may become more brittle. Loose grains become easier for wind to move. If the breeze rises above threshold, transport can begin quickly across exposed patches. The change from rest to drift may be gentle, but once it starts, the surface becomes animated in many small ways. You may see the first signs at ground level. A few grains twitch, then hop. A ripple crest sheds particles from its upwind side. Sand begins to accumulate on the lee side of tiny ridges. It is never the whole dune at once. Motion begins locally, where conditions are right. The Dune Sea wakes in patches, each one answering the wind at its own moment. For now, the breeze remains light. The sand is quiet beneath your hand. You can draw your fingers through it and make a shallow groove. The edges slump softly inward. If left alone, the groove will hold for a while, then blur, then vanish. The dune does not rush to heal. It simply lets the next processes arrive. This gentle readiness is the essence of an active ERG. It is not always moving visibly, but it is capable of movement under ordinary winds. Its surfaces are available. Its grains are loose. Its slopes are balanced near thresholds. ERG Chebbi's beauty comes from this poised state, where stillness and motion are never far apart. We climb slowly, keeping the sun to one side. Your shadow moves over the ripples, dark and long. The sand warms around it. The higher we go, the more open the air feels, and the clearer the morning becomes, yet the rhythm remains soft, measured by breath and slope, and as we near the crest, a faint stream of grains begins to move across the surface, and the dune shows us drift in its smallest visible form. The moving grains stay close to the ground. They do not rise like smoke. They hop, tap, and settle, then hop again. ERG Chebbi's great ridges are built from this low, modest motion, repeated beyond counting. You can watch a few grains cross the sunlit ripple crests and feel the whole Dune Sea become present in them. Saltation is the name for this hopping movement. A grain lifted by wind travels a short arc, strikes the surface, and may bounce onward or knock other grains into motion. This chain reaction allows sand transport to continue once the wind is strong enough. Near your feet, the process looks delicate, almost playful, but it is one of the main builders of dunes. Alongside saltation, some grains creep or roll. They are pushed by impacts from hopping grains or by the wind itself. The heaviest particles may move only a little. The finest dust may lift into suspension and leave the immediate surface. Together, These motions sort the sand while moving it, creating patterns that appear calm from far away but lively up close. You stand still and let the grains pass around your shoes. They make a faint ticking sound when they strike the surface, so small it almost blends with the breeze. The sensation against your ankle is light, like dry, cool sparks without heat. Nothing about it feels harsh. It is simply contact, the dune speaking through touch. The flow strengthens for a moment, then fades. A small cloud of grains crosses a ripple and settles in the lee of the crest. The surface has changed, but only slightly. A line is a little fuller. A trough is a little softer. This is how large changes begin, not as grand gestures, but as tiny differences accumulated through time. At the crest, the moving grains gather more visibly. Some pass over the top and fall into the sheltered air beyond. A few stop right on the edge, steepening it by almost nothing. If enough arrive, a small slide will occur. If not, the edge will wait. The dune's patience is made from thresholds. We watch the threshold for a while. The morning wind is not strong enough to release a broad sheet, but it keeps delivering grains. The crest grows subtly, grain by grain. You can sense how the dune holds itself just below movement, and how little it would take for the next soft spill to begin. And as the breeze eases again, we cross to the lee side, where the received grains lie quietly on the upper slope. The lee side is still shaded in places, though the light is approaching. The grains that cross the crest have landed near the top, scattered like a faint dusting over the steeper face. ERG Chebbi's slip slopes receive these offerings all day when wind allows, then adjust in small slides when the angle becomes too steep. For now the surface remains still. You can see the difference between fresh deposits and older sand if you look closely. Fresh grains may lie loosely on top, unmarked by ripples or tracks. Older surfaces may show faint patterns from previous breezes, disturbances, or settling. The slope is a palimpsest, a surface written on, erased, and written on again. The word is formal, but the feeling is gentle. A few grains roll down from the crest. They leave tiny paths, almost invisible, then stop among others. Their movement is too small to trigger a slide. The face holds. Friction between grains, their shapes and their packing all resist motion until the balance changes. A slope may look passive, but it is full of quiet forces holding one another in place. When the slope eventually releases, it will not be an interruption to the dune. It will be the dune maintaining itself. By sliding, the face returns to a stable angle. By receiving new grains, it prepares to slide again. This cycle is not a failure of structure, but the structure itself. ERG Chebbi persists through adjustment. We descend carefully beside the fresh deposits. The sand is soft enough to flow around the sides of your feet. Each step creates a shallow fan downslope. The sound is drier now than it was at night, slightly brighter in the morning air. Light enters the sliding grains, and they sparkle briefly before settling. At the lower slope, the first sun reaches us. Warmth touches your shoulder, then the sand around your hand. The shaded blue recedes. The dune face shifts from cool gray to warm gold. The same surface feels different under new light, and you can sense the day beginning to loosen the quiet night's hold. We rest at the base with the sun still low. The dune above us is brightening, and the trough is filling with color. The breeze comes and goes, not yet steady. Every pause lets the surface settle. Every breath of air tests it again. The morning remains slow, and as the sun spreads through the trough, we follow the line where shade withdraws, watching small forms appear from the soft dark. The shadow edge moves down the slope almost imperceptibly. One ripple after another enters light. ERG Chebbi seems to reveal itself by increments, never rushing the eye. You can see a beetle track now, curving through what had been darkness. You can see a thin mineral streak near the base. You can see where a small slide smoothed part of the face. This movement of light changes visibility, but it also changes heat. Sunlit sand begins to warm quickly. Air rises slightly from it. Shadowed sand remains cooler for a while. These temperature differences can affect small wind currents and animal behavior. A creature may pause at a shade line. A plant may warm on one side first. The dune's morning is a shifting map of comfort. You place your hand partly in sunlight, partly in shade. The difference is already clear. The lit side feels warm and dry. The shaded side holds the night's coolness. Your skin becomes a small instrument measuring the dune's surface energy. No numbers are needed. The body knows the gradient through sensation. The surface itself responds too. Warmer sand may become drier and more mobile. Fine films of moisture vanish. Crusts may crack. The top grains separate more easily. When wind returns later, it will find a different surface than it would have found before sunrise. The dune is prepared by light before it is shaped by air. We walk along the shadow edge because it is a peaceful boundary. It is neither night nor day, neither cool nor warm. It moves without sound, slowly changing everything it touches. In a landscape of drift, even light behaves like a gentle traveler, crossing slopes, filling hollows and leaving no weight behind. The trough ahead opens toward a wider field of dunes. More crests are lit now. The colors deepen. Gold becomes amber. Amber becomes pale orange. And the shadows keep a soft violet tone. ERG Chebbi is no longer hidden, but it remains calm. Morning has not broken the spell. It has only widened it. And as the day widens, the Dune Sea begins to show its scale again, with ridges extending beyond the first folds of sand. From a higher point, the ridges of ERG Chebbi stretch outward in overlapping bands. Some are high and smooth, some are lower, broken by plants or rougher patches. Some curve gently, while others run with more persistence across the field. You can see how the Dune Sea occupies the land like a slow, golden current. Scale in an ERG is built from repetition. One dune leads to another. One trough opens into the next. The pattern continues until the eye no longer separates every form. This repetition can be restful because it gives the mind something simple to follow. Rise, fall, rise again. The landscape becomes a breathing pattern made of sand. Yet within that repetition, the science remains rich. Dune spacing reflects how wind flow adjusts after passing over each ridge. A dune creates turbulence, shelter, and zones of deposition downwind. Another dune may form or grow where sand accumulates in those zones. Over time, spacing can organize itself, even though the surface began from loose grains and moving air. Large dunes may also absorb smaller dunes. A small form can migrate up the windward side of a larger ridge, merge with it, and contribute its sand to the bigger body. Conversely, new small dunes may form on flanks or in troughs. ERG Chebbi's surface is not only moving forward, it is also exchanging sand among forms, in a kind of quiet circulation. You can picture this circulation like a slow conversation between neighbors. A smaller dune gives sand to a larger slope. A crest passes grains into a sheltered face. A trough sends material onward when the wind aligns. A plant catches a little and holds it aside. No single motion tells the whole story, but together they keep the Dune Sea alive. The morning breeze strengthens slightly. Sand begins to move in thin threads across exposed patches. It is still gentle, but more continuous than before. You can see the movement best where sunlight crosses a darker surface. The grains flash briefly, then vanish into brightness. The Dune Sea is waking, but in whispers. We stand still and let the moving threads pass. They do not disturb the calm. They make it more tangible. Every tiny motion confirms the slow shaping that made this place. ERG Chebbi is not just scenery. It is a process you can hear faintly, feel at your ankles, and see in the angle of every ridge. And as the breeze follows the slope upward, we move with it, toward a crest where the day's first sand begins to gather. The windward face is warmer now. The sand feels dry and loose at the surface, firmer just beneath. Your steps climb with the moving grains, and the breeze touches your back. ERG Chebbi's windward slopes often feel like places of approach, where sand travels upward in small hops toward a crest that waits to receive more. The moving grains do not form a continuous sheet. They appear in pulses, thin and low. A ripple sends a few over its crest. A smoother patch lets them travel farther. A small depression catches them briefly before another impact lifts some onward. Transport is uneven at the scale of your feet, even when the overall direction is clear. This unevenness helps create texture. Where grains are deposited, a ripple crest may grow. Where impacts are frequent, grains may be knocked forward. Where the wind accelerates, sand may be removed. The surface becomes a mosaic of tiny erosion and deposition zones. Morning light reveals them as subtle changes in roughness, brightness, and line. We climb beside the flow, matching its direction but not its speed. The breeze is steady enough now to make a faint hiss. It is not loud, only a dry whisper that rises when sand crosses a ripple field and fades over firmer patches. Your breathing remains slow. The sound of drift becomes part of the rhythm, not an interruption. At the crest, a slight lip has formed. Sand gathers there because the air changes as it passes over the top. Some grains cross and fall. Some remain near the edge. The crest becomes fuller, more delicate. You can see how a dune builds toward its own release, grain by grain, until the slope beyond must adjust. A small slide begins near your left, only a narrow sheet a few handspans wide. It slips down the lee face with a soft, silky sound, then stops. The mark it leaves is smooth and fresh, lighter than the surrounding surface. There is no drama in it. It is the dune settling into balance. We watch the small slide fade into stillness. More grains continue to arrive, but not enough yet for another release. The crest holds. The breeze thins. The day is beginning its work slowly, and the dune receives it without haste. And as the fresh slide rests on the lee face, we follow its path downward, where gravity has drawn the morning's first bright sheet of sand. The slide path is smooth beneath the sun, a narrow tongue of newly settled grains on the steeper face. ERG Chebbi's lee slopes are renewed by countless small tongues like this. Some overlap, some erase older marks, some stop halfway and become faint bands. From below, they may be almost invisible, but up close they are clear. The grains in the slide moved together for a moment, then stopped together when friction and slope found balance again. This collective movement is brief, but it organizes the surface. It smooths roughness, covers tracks, and lays down a thin inclined layer. If buried later, that layer may become part of the dune's internal structure. A small morning slide can join a long hidden record. You walk beside it, careful not to disturb the fresh surface. The sand around your feet is warmer now. It releases a faint dry scent, more noticeable as the sun strengthens. The air on the lee side remains slightly calmer than the crest, but the day's heat is reaching it. The boundary between night-cooled sand and sun-warmed sand continues to move downhill. The slope teaches balance through touch. Too steep, and sand slides. Gentle enough, and it rests. Moist enough, and it holds longer. Dry and loose, and it responds quickly. Every grain touches others. Every contact contributes to stability or motion. The dune is a vast community of small contacts, each one ordinary, together making form. At the lower end of the slide, the tongue spreads into a little fan. Its edge is feathered, not abrupt. A few grains have traveled farther than the rest and lie alone on older sand. Later winds may pick them up, or they may remain until another slide covers them. The dune does not separate endings from beginnings very clearly. We reach the base and turn back toward the slope. In morning light, the slide shines softly against the older face. It will not look this fresh for long. Wind may ripple it. Footsteps may cross it. Another slide may cover it. For now, it is a quiet sign that the day's drift has begun. And as the sun warms the trough around us, the Dune Sea's colors deepen, and the mineral nature of the sand becomes more visible. The sand is no longer gray or silver. It glows with warm ochre, pale gold, and muted orange. ERG Chebbi's color comes from mineral grains, coatings, and the way light passes through desert air. Iron oxides can lend warmth to sand surfaces, while quartz adds brightness and small glints. The Dune Sea seems lit from outside, but also from within its grains. When you look closely, the color is not uniform. One patch leans honey-colored, another is paler. A dark streak gathers heavier minerals in a ripple trough. Around plants, organic fragments dull the surface. On fresh slide faces, grains may reflect light differently because they are newly arranged. Color becomes a map of composition, texture, and recent movement. You let a handful fall slowly. In sunlight, the grains flash briefly as they turn. Some appear translucent, some are rust-stained, some are almost white. The fall lasts only a moment, but it reveals variety within what seemed like a single color from afar. The Dune Sea is made of differences so small they become softness. Mineral coatings can form through weathering and long exposure. Iron-rich films may stain grains reddish or yellowish. Abrasion can remove or dull surfaces. Dust can coat them again. The desert's color is therefore not just inherited from source rocks, but modified by travel, exposure, and chemical change. Even color has a history of drift. The warmth of the sand affects your senses too. It rises through your shoes more clearly now. The air near the surface begins to shimmer slightly, though the morning is still gentle. The scent of dry minerals is more present. The dune feels awake, but not loud. It remains slow, spacious, and patient. In this light, the Dune Sea's curves seem almost liquid. The windward ramps flow upward. The slip faces pour downward. The troughs lie like quiet channels. Sand is solid to the hand, but landscape-scale sand behaves as a fluid when the wind has time. ERG Chebbi shows that contradiction beautifully, grain by grain and ridge by ridge. We move across the warm trough, following a path that is not a path, only the easiest line between slopes. The surface alternates between firm and soft, rippled and smooth. Each texture changes the sound of your step, and every sound returns quickly to quiet. And as we pass through this warm color, the wider desert plain appears beyond a low gap, reminding us again where the Dune Sea gathers its material. Through the gap, the stony plain lies bright under the morning sun. It looks flatter, harsher in texture, but not harsh in feeling. It is simply different from the Dune Sea, a surface of gravel, compacted sediment, and open space. ERG Chebbi rises from beside it like sand that found a place to stay. The plain and the dunes are connected by transport. Wind can carry sand from exposed surfaces toward the ERG. Water, during rare flows, can bring sediment into lower areas. Weathering breaks down rock into smaller particles. Deflation removes finer material, sometimes leaving gravel behind. The dune field is not isolated. It is part of a broader sediment system. On the plain, wind may move sand more easily where the surface is smooth and bare. Gravel patches can armor the ground, reducing erosion by protecting finer material beneath. Obstacles can create small deposits. A dry channel can supply sand after flow has ended. Every surface has a different relationship with moving air, and the dunes gather what the system allows. You can imagine a grain resting on the plain before joining ERG Chebbi. It sits near a stone, shaded from the strongest wind. Then a stronger breeze arrives. Another grain strikes it. It rolls, hops, and comes to rest in a shallow depression. Later, it moves again. Many pauses later, it reaches the dune field and becomes part of a slope. That journey may take a long time, but the desert does not count distance in urgency. It works through opportunity. A windy day here, a brief rain there, a season of exposure, a year of stillness. Sand supply is not constant, and neither is transport. The ERG grows and shifts through pulses spread across long intervals. We stand in the gap and feel air move from the plain toward the dunes. It carries a slightly different scent, more stony, less softly mineral. The ground ahead is firmer. Behind us, the dunes wait in warm gold. The contrast clarifies both landscapes, showing how the hard plain and soft sand belong to one continuum. Then we turn back into the Dune Sea, because the story tonight stays with ERG Chebbi's drift. The plain remains visible behind us, a source and boundary, while the sand ahead rises into the next series of ridges. The wind touches both places, but the dunes make its passage visible, and as we return to the open sand, the breeze strengthens just enough to comb the surface into moving threads. The threads of sand move low and bright across the slope. They gather in shallow streams where the surface is smooth, then break apart over ripples. ERG Chebbi begins to sound faintly alive, with a dry whisper moving around your ankles. The breeze is steady but gentle, and the dune answers with motion. You can see saltation most clearly against the sunlit slope. Grains lift in small arcs, strike and rebound. Some remain in motion for several hops. Others stop quickly in ripple troughs or behind tiny obstacles. The moving layer is thin, perhaps only a little above the surface, yet it is enough to feed the larger forms over time. This is the working height of wind-shaped sand. Vast dunes are made close to the ground. The highest ridges depend on transport happening in a narrow zone near your feet. That intimacy is calming. The enormous landscape is built by movements you can almost touch, by grains passing through a layer of air no taller than your hand. A small ripple migrates as you watch. Its upwind side loses grains. Its lee side gains them. The crest shifts slightly forward. The change is minute, but visible if you rest your eyes on it long enough. You are watching a miniature dune travel, repeating the same principle that moves larger dunes through ERG Chebbi's field. The breeze lifts a little more sand, then eases again. The moving threads thin. The surface quiets. This pulsing is common because wind is rarely perfectly steady near the ground. It arrives in small variations, shaped by turbulence, slope, heating, and distance. Sand responds immediately, beginning and stopping with remarkable sensitivity. You feel the sensitivity as a change in sound. When transport increases, the hiss grows. When it stops, the hush returns. The desert becomes almost musical, though never loud. It is a low, granular rhythm, the sound of grains meeting grains under a morning wind. We continue along the slope, keeping our steps slow. The moving sand partly fills the edges of our footprints even as we make them. You can watch your own track begin to soften behind you. Not erased at once, but gently edited by the same drift that shapes the dunes. And as the wind edits our footprints, the Dune Sea reminds us that nothing here stays separate from the larger surface for long. The softened prints become part of the slope, and the slope becomes part of the wider dune, and ERG Chebbi keeps breathing through its grains without asking to be watched. You can let your steps slow now, until walking becomes almost the same as standing still. The wind moves lightly across the surface, lifting only what it can carry, leaving the rest in peaceful balance. We settle near the foot of a warm dune, where the sand has gathered in a low, smooth apron. Above us, the crest shines softly in the late light, and below us the trough lies quiet, holding a little shade. A few grains still travel past your hand, tapping once, then resting. The great Dune Sea does not need to finish its work tonight, because its work has always been slow. The air is dry and gentle. The sand beneath you supports your weight grain by grain, adjusting around you until there is nothing left to do but rest. Farther out, the ridges continue in silence, each one shaped by wind, gravity, heat, and time. You can feel how the drift goes on beyond your attention, not hurrying, not stopping, simply moving when the wind asks and settling when the wind lets go. Now the light thins across ERG Chebbi, and the warm colors soften toward dusk again. The dunes hold their long curves under the open sky, and every small ripple becomes quieter in the fading air. You have come to rest where sand has been resting for ages, where grains arrive, pause, and are carried onward only when the world is ready. The last breeze smooths the surface beside you, and there is only the soft sand, the wide stillness, and the slow quiet of the Dune Sea settling into night.